Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Was Saved by Aizawa. Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Central Hospital Healthcare Report. Dr. Isagawa, Primary Care Physician Dr. Suzuki, Attending Care Physician Dr. Kato, Attending Care Physician. Patient information, name, YN gender, female DOB, no relevant information age, 5 years, est. Parent guardian information, maternal parent, no relevant information paternal parent, no relevant information legal guardian S, no relevant information. Report, the child appeared small for her age and showed signs of malnutrition. She was unkempt, with dirty clothing and hair, and seemed distant, unresponsive to verbal stimuli. External injuries. Multiple bruises of varying sizes and stages of healing were observed on her arms, particularly the left forearm and upper arm. A large contusion on the right thigh was noted, approximately 8 centimeters in diameter and purplish in color. Bruises on the lower back and left ribcage suggested blunt force trauma. Small abrasions on the knees were consistent with falls, partially scabbed over. A healing laceration on the left cheek measured approximately 3 centimeters in length. Multiple superficial cuts on both forearms were present, some fresh and others healing. Internal injuries. Mental status. The child was withdrawn and did not follow commands or respond to questions. Cranial nerves. Grossly intact as far as could be assessed given the child's lack of cooperation. Motor. Full range of motion in all extremities was noted, though movements were guarded and hesitant. Diagnosis. Multiple contusions and lacerations were consistent with physical abuse. Signs of severe neglect were evident, with malnutrition and poor hygiene. The patient would remain admitted under close observation while the social and legal aspects were addressed. A multidisciplinary team was assembled to ensure comprehensive care, including medical, psychological, and social support. Physician signature. Dr. Hiro Isagawa, Primary Physician. Hiro Public Safety Commission Police Report Date, August 24, XXXX. Incident Number, 2048-092. Location, Mpusutapha Highway, Exit 12. Reporting Officer, Officer Tetsuya Hori, Badge Number 8765. Supervising Detective, Detective Hiroto Sato, Badge Number 2234. Incident Summary. At approximately 18:20 hours, a 5-year-old girl was discovered alone on the side of Mpusutapha Highway near Exit 12 by 2 off-duty pro heroes, Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa, and Present Mike, Hisashi Yamada. The girl appeared to be in distress and exhibited signs of physical injury. The heroes promptly transported her to Mpusutafu General Hospital and notified local law enforcement. Details of the incident. Eraserhead and Present Mike were returning from a personal engagement when they noticed a young girl, later identified only as YN, walking alone near the highway. The child was barefoot, wearing a torn and dirty dress, and appeared disoriented. The heroes immediately stopped to assist her. YN was initially unresponsive to questions and seemed reluctant to communicate. The heroes noted visible bruises on her arms, legs, and face, as well as minor lacerations on her hands and feet. Suspecting possible neglect or abuse, they transported her to Central Hospital for medical evaluation and contacted the Mpusutafu Police Department. Injuries and medical evaluation. Visible injuries included multiple bruises on both arms and legs, varying in size and in different stages of healing. Bruising and swelling around the right eye were also noted. Lacerations on the palms of both hands and the soles of her feet were consistent with walking barefoot on rough surfaces. A small cut on the lower lip was partially healed. Medical report. A full examination by hospital staff was pending. Initial evaluation suggested signs of neglect and potential physical abuse. Investigation and findings. Identity. The child provided the name YN, but was unable to recall her last name. She could not provide any information regarding her guardians or how she came to be on the highway. Search efforts. Officers canvassed the surrounding area and contacted nearby towns and cities. No reports of a missing child matching YN's description had been filed. Database checks. No matching records were found in national missing persons databases. Witness statements. No witnesses came forward with information regarding the child's appearance on the highway. No vehicles or suspicious activity were reported in the vicinity at the time of discovery. Further investigation. Detectives pursued leads regarding possible abandonment or trafficking. Efforts to locate the child's family or guardians were ongoing. Evidence collected. Photographic evidence. Photos of the child's injuries were taken by hospital staff and logged into evidence. Personal items. The child had no personal belongings at the time of discovery. Actions taken. Immediate care. The child was placed under protective custody at Muzutafu General Hospital pending further investigation. Hero involvement. Eraser Head and Present Mike provided full statements regarding the discovery and their actions. Both heroes remained available for further questioning if needed. Coordination with Child Services. Child Protective Services was notified and involved in the case. Additional notes. The child remained in a state of emotional distress, avoiding communication beyond basic responses. She showed signs of trauma, possibly due to prolonged neglect or abuse. Further psychological evaluation was requested to assess her mental state and any additional trauma not immediately apparent. Next steps. Continued canvassing of the area and expanding the search radius for possible witnesses or evidence was planned. All known information would be reassessed to explore any potential leads related to missing children in other regions. Ongoing collaboration with the Hero Public Safety Commission and Child Protective Services would be maintained for the safety and well-being of YN. Reporting Officer's Signature. Officer Tetsuya Hori Badge Number 8765 Supervising Detective's Signature. Detective Haruto Mori Badge Number 2234. Quirk Information. Name. Domain expansion. This quirk allows the user to create a space around them referred to as a domain within a certain radius. Once activated, the user gains complete control over everything within its boundaries, including the ability to manipulate, transform, or create objects, buildings, and even the environment according to their will. Once someone steps into the user's domain, the user receives information that can assist during combat, such as specific weaknesses or vulnerable moments in a person's life that can be distorted and forced to relive. Domain expansion allows the user to gradually tear down the mental strength inside a person's mind and even use their own mind against them. Drawbacks. If the user exceeds their physical capacity and overuses their quirk, expected drawbacks include migraines, coughing, fainting, and potentially comas. The domain is susceptible to disruption by quirk-canceling abilities or by overwhelming the user's concentration, causing a loss of focus. The user's manipulations are confined to the domain. Anything outside its boundaries remains unaffected. Stats. Power, 4-5 Speed, 5-5 Technique, 4-5 Intelligence, 3-5 Cooperation, 3-5. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the nearby apartment parking lot. Shoyuta Aizawa sighed. The day had been grueling, filled with intense training sessions and what seemed like never-ending paperwork that came with being a teacher at the most prestigious school in Tokyo. He leaned his head back against the armrest of the couch, the soft fabric contrasting with his unshaven stubble. As he sank deeper into the fabric, his eyes grew heavy, struggling to remain open. However, rest wasn't an option, not when there was still work to be done. He had a duty as an underground pro hero, and despite his regrets about choosing this path, he had to persevere. With a weary sigh, Aizawa straightened up, slinging his capture weapon over his shoulders, and headed out into the night. As he descended the stairs of his apartment complex and reached the connecting street, a woman accidentally bumped into him, causing them both to stumble. She held the top of her head as she looked up at Aizawa, who met her gaze. Her eyes widened, and a look of concern and guilt flashed across her face. Before he could apologize, she reached into her bag and held out a small wad of crumpled bills to him. She pressed the money into his hand, saying softly that it wasn't much but she hoped it would help. Aizawa stared back at her in shock, his eyes flickering between the cash and her concerned gaze, clearly perplexed. He tried to explain that there had been a mistake, but she interrupted him, smiling and insisting that he take it. Aizawa frowned, trying to piece together what she meant. Then it hit him. He glanced down at his attire, baggy clothes, scruffy hair, untamed beard, and a perpetually tired expression. She thought he was homeless. He firmly tried to hand the money back to her, asserting that he had a job at UA and appreciated the sentiment but was okay. She crossed her arms, looking unconvinced as she examined his appearance. With a slight cough, she gently pushed his hand away, insisting that he didn't need to make up stories and that he would find a job soon. She urged him to take the money and buy something warm to eat. Aizawa's frustration grew as she continued to insist on her goodwill. Their conversation went back and forth until a loud, familiar voice interrupted them. Present Mike jogged over with a huge grin, announcing that he had found some udon coupons in the library, ensuring they wouldn't go hungry that night. Aizawa felt his blood run cold as he turned to see his old friend Yamada approaching. He hesitantly met the woman's gaze, which had shifted from surprise to something worse, pity. He stammered that it wasn't what it looked like, feeling uncomfortable and flustered as her gaze flickered between him and Mike, whose enthusiasm was poorly timed. Before he could finish, the woman shoved the money back into his hand with a firm nod, wishing him luck and urging him to fight. With a sorrowful glance, she hurried away down the empty street. As her footsteps faded, Aizawa stood in shock, the bill still clutched in his hand as he tried to piece together his shattered ego. Present Mike finally reached him, casually slinging an arm around his shoulder and asking what had just happened. Aizawa snapped back to reality, glaring at Mike before sighing and pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. He muttered a quiet, "nothing," as he shoved the crumpled bills into his pocket and turned away, walking as far as he could. Aizawa and Present Mike walked side by side down the dimly lit street, their conversation a mix of Aizawa's grumbled responses and Yamada's excited chatter. Yamada began discussing plans for class the next day, suggesting a surprise quiz, but Aizawa cut in dryly, reminding him of how much the kids disliked surprises. Yamada gasped, ready with a retort, but the words caught in his throat as they turned onto a quieter street. Aizawa's hand shot out, halting him mid-step. He spoke quietly, his voice tinged with concern as he pointed out a small figure under the flickering light of a nearby street lamp, a little girl, no older than 5 or 6, shivering and huddled against the base of the lamppost. Her clothes were tattered, and her wide eyes darted around in fear. Both Aizawa and Yamada's expressions instantly became serious. They shared a quick glance, all traces of their previous conversation vanishing as they approached her cautiously, their instincts as heroes kicking in. Aizawa called to her gently, asking if she was lost. The girl looked up, her lip trembling but remaining silent, hugging herself and rocking back and forth. Present Mike crouched down slowly, his usual exuberance replaced with a calm tenderness. He assured her that they were there to help and asked if she could tell them where her parents were. The girl's eyes widened as he moved closer, but she shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes, threatening to spill over. She was clearly terrified, alone in the dark, and in need of comfort. Aizawa sighed, his heart heavy as he crouched down next to Yamada. He assured her that they were going to take her somewhere safe, encouraging her not to be scared and promising to do everything they could to protect her. The little girl met their gazes hesitantly, her quiet, raspy voice asking if they promised. The sight of her vulnerability melted their hearts, but Aizawa quickly regained his focus, nodding at her as he extended his hand for her to take. The girl hesitated, then slowly reached out her small fingers to grasp Aizawa's much larger hand. Her tiny fingers trembled against his, igniting a surge of protectiveness within him. Whatever had happened to this child, he vowed to ensure her safety from that moment on. Present Mike stood up, stretching his back straight as he glanced around the street, waiting for someone to emerge from the shadows. The night remained silent, leaving them alone with the little girl. Yamada suggested they get her checked into the agency, his usual light-hearted demeanor replaced by seriousness. Aizawa nodded in agreement, gently lifting the small girl into his arms. She clung to him desperately, burying her face in his shoulder as they began to walk down the street, both heroes acutely aware that their night had taken a more serious turn. If only they had known how much this action would change their lives forever. Chapter End. You lay on a stiff hospital bed, the sheets scratchy against the bandages wrapped carefully around your arms and legs. Every inch of your body ached, as if needles were stabbing into you, leaving you unable to move. Although most of your wounds were bandaged, the pain was overwhelming. The bright overhead fluorescent lights pierced your eyes, intensifying the throbbing in your head. You tried to shift into a more comfortable position, but every movement seemed to amplify the pain. Each kick of your leg or flex of your elbow tugged at the bandages, reminding you of how trapped you felt. Slowly, you turned your head against the firm pillow, your gaze landing on the two men who had brought you here. Even through the glass pane, their seriousness was evident, one of them especially so. You struggled to remember their names, but the effort made your head hurt even more. All you could recall before blacking out was the raw, unfiltered pain that had consumed you. Everything else felt like a blur, leaving gaps in your memory that your 5-year-old mind couldn't process. You strained to hear their conversation, but the glass muffled their voices, leaving you in the dark about what was happening. Confusion washed over you as you continued to watch them intently, but your body felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion and pain. It was a relief to simply lay there. With a small sigh, your eyes began to droop despite the bright lights. The fear and confusion from before lingered but faded beneath your exhaustion. For now, you felt safe, and that was enough. As you began to drift off, their muffled voices became a soft hum in the background, reminding you that you were not alone. A few hours passed, and during that time, you drifted in and out of sleep. The steady beeping of the heart monitor and the quiet hum of the hospital filled the silence. Eventually, exhaustion took over completely, allowing you to fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. When you woke up, the room was dimmer than before. The harsh fluorescent lights had been turned down, but the throbbing in your head remained, though it was more manageable now. You blinked a few times, allowing your eyes to adjust as you became aware of other voices in the room. 3 men stood near the foot of your bed, deep in conversation. You recognized the first 2 men from earlier. One had long, wild black hair and a tired expression, dressed in almost entirely black except for a tattered scarf around his neck. He spoke in a low, measured tone, arms crossed over his chest. The other man was taller, with bright blonde hair pulled back into a spiky ponytail and yellow-tinted sunglasses perched on his nose. His outfit was vibrant, covered in bold patterns that matched his energetic presence, though he now appeared just as serious as the first man. The third man was unfamiliar, a police officer in uniform, with short, neatly combed brown hair and sharp eyes that darted between the two heroes. His stern expression conveyed that he meant business. After a moment of lying still, you decided to sit up. The effort it took to push yourself up required more strength than you realized, and as you attempted to rise, a small, involuntary noise escaped your lips as your muscles protested. That sound caught their attention, and all 3 men turned to look at you. The man with the tired eyes stepped forward first, his expression softening as he approached. There was a protective quality in his movements, as if he was ready to stop anyone from getting too close too quickly. The blonde man followed suit, tilting his head slightly as if trying to gauge your thoughts. The police officer was last to move, but his stern face relaxed a bit upon seeing you were awake. He introduced himself as Officer Sato, expressing relief that you were awake. He then pointed to the man with black hair, introducing him as Eraserhead, and to the blonde with glasses, calling him Present Mike. The names didn't exactly sound familiar, but there was something comforting about being in their presence, even if the source of that comfort was elusive. Officer Sato took a step closer, his expression kind and patient, ensuring that you felt safe. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself to your eye level. He didn't rush, allowing you a moment to adjust, his presence calm and steady. He began softly, his voice gentle and reassuring, letting you know that you were safe. He acknowledged the confusion you might be feeling and assured you that no one was going to hurt you. He paused, observing you carefully, ensuring your comfort before continuing. He expressed a desire to help you figure out what happened, emphasizing that there was no rush. He glanced briefly at the other 2 men, who relaxed a bit, stepping back just enough to give you space. Officer Sato asked if you remembered anything about what happened before you arrived, his tone slow and soothing, guiding you through your thoughts gently. He reassured you that it was okay if you didn't remember, but any detail, no matter how small, could help them understand. He waited patiently, allowing you to take your time, his voice filled with quiet encouragement. You hesitated, trying to piece together his question. Memories flashed in your mind, chaotic images of something that had gone wrong, but everything felt jumbled. You shook your head slightly, wincing as a headache flared up. Eraserhead spoke quietly, his voice surprisingly gentle, encouraging you to take your time and not to push yourself too hard. He reassured you that they were there to understand what happened. When you hesitated again, he offered a small, understanding smile, reminding you that sometimes these things could be hard to remember. Officer Sato then shifted slightly, his voice softening even more as he asked if you remembered anything about your family, perhaps your parents, or any names that held significance for you. He waited patiently, his gaze kind and encouraging, understanding that recalling such memories could take time. You searched your mind, trying to grasp anything solid, but it felt like trying to catch smoke. The harder you tried to focus, the more everything seemed to slip away, causing a knot of anxiety to tighten in your chest. You didn't want to disappoint them, but everything felt so blurry. You mumbled that you didn't know, feeling small and unsure. Present Mike stepped forward, offering a reassuring smile, affirming that they were there to help and that they would figure it out together. Officer Sato nodded as he began to stand up slowly, reiterating that they were there for you and that they would work through this together when you were ready. Their warm voices made you feel a little less alone, instilling a sense that maybe things would be okay, even without all the answers right now. The quiet hum of the hospital faded into the background as the three men moved away from your bed, their conversation lowering to a murmur. You remained awake, feeling no need to alert them to your awareness. Their hushed voices stirred your curiosity, prompting you to listen in on their discussion. Aizawa expressed his concerns, his voice a low grumble as he leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. He worried about the Hero Commission's reputation, noting that they weren't known for their gentle touch, especially towards someone so young. Officer Sato nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging Aizawa's concerns while emphasizing that the commission had resources that could protect you, help figure out what happened, and keep you safe. Aizawa countered, questioning at what cost, suggesting that you would be treated like an asset rather than a child, and that throwing you into the commission's world might only worsen your fear. Present Mike, who had been quiet until then, pushed his glasses up and agreed with Aizawa, stating that you needed something familiar and normal after everything you had been through. Sato considered their points, his brow furrowing as he weighed the options, realizing that you couldn't stay in the hospital forever, especially since they didn't know who your parents were or if they were still in the picture. There was a pause as the tension in the air grew thick while they contemplated the next steps. Finally, Sato addressed Aizawa, suggesting that he seemed to have taken a liking to you. Aizawa straightened slightly, caught off guard by the statement. He insisted that he was merely concerned for your well-being, though there was an underlying tone that hinted at deeper feelings. Sato raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile forming on his face, suggesting that Aizawa cared about what happened to you, which was more than just concern. Aizawa didn't argue, letting out a long breath as the tension in his shoulders eased. Present Mike glanced between the two, curiosity evident on his face. Sato continued, proposing that perhaps you should stay with Aizawa for a little while, at least until they figured out a more permanent solution. Both Aizawa and Present Mike were taken aback by the suggestion. Aizawa's eyes widened slightly as he sought confirmation from Sato, surprised by the idea of being responsible for you. Sato nodded, gently asserting that you needed normality and stability, and that you seemed to trust Aizawa, even if you didn't fully realize it yet. Present Mike blinked, still processing the idea, and remarked on how unexpected it was for Aizawa to take on such a role. Aizawa rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden responsibility being suggested. He was accustomed to dealing with troubled kids, but this felt different, more personal. He mulled over the decision, the room falling into a heavy silence as he considered the implications. Finally, he let out a slow breath and nodded, the resolve in his eyes clear. He agreed to take you in, at least temporarily, until they figured out something more permanent. Present Mike grinned, clapping Aizawa on the shoulder, acknowledging his decision as a commendable one. Aizawa acknowledged the situation with a small nod, his mind racing with the logistics of this new responsibility. Deep down, he felt he was making the right choice. This child needed someone to keep her grounded, And he could be that person, at least for now. Officer Sato smiled, relief washing over his face, and expressed gratitude to Aizawa, believing it was the best decision for her at that moment. With that settled, the three men turned their attention back to the girl, who quickly closed her eyes, pretending to still be asleep. Inside, she felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, confusion, but also a small sense of safety. Perhaps things would be okay after all. A few hours passed, and while she had initially tried to fake sleep, she must have drifted off for real at some point. When she finally woke up, the room was filled with the soft light of morning, the sun shining through the window and casting warm patterns on the walls. The hospital room felt cozy and safe, a stark contrast to how it had seemed before. She blinked a few times, adjusting to the brightness, and sat up slowly. The bandages on her body pulled slightly with the movement, but the pain was more manageable now. A few minutes later, the door creaked open, and a nurse walked in with a warm smile on her face. Her presence was immediately soothing. She greeted the girl softly, asking if she had slept well. The girl nodded slowly, still a bit sleepy as she rubbed her eyes, feeling more at ease with the nurse's comforting presence. The nurse replied that it was good to hear and set down a clipboard on the table beside the bed, telling the girl that she had been very brave. The girl remained quiet, watching as the nurse moved around the room. The nurse didn't seem to mind her silence and continued to chat as she checked the machines next to the bed. After a moment, she turned back to the girl with a bright smile, mentioning that some people from the previous night were there to see her again, expressing their concern. The girl's eyes widened at that. She remembered the men from last night, the ones who had saved her from the cold. Feeling a mix of nervousness and curiosity, she tilted her head at the nurse. The nurse assured her that she would let them know she was awake, giving her hand a gentle squeeze before heading toward the door. Just before leaving, she paused and turned her head slightly, saying that the girl was in good hands. A few moments later, the door opened again, and Officer Sato walked in, his usual stern expression softened into a warm smile. He greeted the girl gently, and Aizawa and Present Mike followed behind him, both offering reassuring looks. Officer Sato crouched down to her eye level and explained that they needed to discuss the next steps since she couldn't stay in the hospital forever. He mentioned that they had talked about finding a safe place for her to stay until things were sorted out, and that Aizawa would be taking care of her for a little while. Though much of what they said flew over her head, Aizawa seemed kind, and she didn't mind the idea of staying with him. She nodded in agreement, and with her affirmation, the three men, especially Aizawa, visibly brightened. Officer Sato expressed relief and assured her they would take good care of her. As they began the discharge paperwork, discussing quietly among themselves, the girl felt a little overwhelmed but strangely comforted by their presence. Just as she was about to get off the bed, Present Mike stepped forward, holding out a pair of sparkly pink shoes. He grinned as he presented them, saying they were a little gift for being such a good kid. Her eyes widened at the sight of the shoes. They were a bit too big but beautiful, the kind she had always wanted. Present Mike knelt down and carefully put them on her feet, adjusting the straps to ensure they fit as best as possible. He stepped back to admire his handiwork, and she looked down at the shoes, feeling a warmth in her chest that was unfamiliar yet nice. She almost felt like crying but held it back, not wanting to show too much emotion. She whispered her thanks, her voice barely audible, but Present Mike heard and responded with a big, beaming smile. He was glad she liked them. She jumped off the bed, the shoes sparkling as they caught the light, and hesitantly walked over to where the three men were waiting. Just before she left the room, the nurse returned, holding out a small chocolate bar for her. She said it was for the road, winking and ruffling the girl's hair gently. The girl looked up at her, feeling that same warmth again, and thanked her while clutching the chocolate bar in her hand. The nurse reminded her to take care and told her she was a special little girl, encouraging her to remember that. The girl stood for a moment, confused about why they were being so kind to her when she felt she had nothing to offer in return. A raspy voice broke her trance. Aizawa asked if she was coming, his hands in his pockets. She turned around slowly, looking up at the men in front of her. Their soft expressions and Officer Sato's gentle smile reassured her. They were nice people, and that was why they wanted to help her. With that conclusion, she walked out with Aizawa, Present Mike, and Officer Sato. As they reached the parking lot, Sato turned to her, giving one last smile before bending down to pat her head. He assured her she was in good hands and said he would see her around. She nodded, feeling a bit sad to see him go but understanding that he needed to help others too. Sato waved quickly before heading over to his patrol car. You watched as he entered the car, turned on the engine, and with a mischievous grin, activated the sirens, laughing as the traffic parted for him. You couldn't help but stare, feeling a mix of surprise and concern at his sudden burst of energy. Aizawa muttered behind you, questioning whether he was allowed to act that way. Present Mike laughed, shaking his head and commenting on the man's eccentricity. Aizawa sighed, bending down to help you into the back seat, securing you with the seatbelt. He expressed his frustration with the officers from Yuzudafu, noting how everyone he had encountered seemed a bit unhinged. After closing the door, he walked around to the driver's seat. As Aizawa started the car, Present Mike opened the passenger door and climbed in. Aizawa paused, giving him a flat look and questioning his presence. Present Mike, genuinely confused, replied that he was joining them. Aizawa reminded him that he had his own car, but Present Mike huffed and crossed his arms, insisting on joining them as a close friend. Aizawa sighed, clearly exasperated but not wanting to argue further. He started the car, shaking his head as Present Mike adjusted himself in the seat. With everyone settled, the car began to move, leaving the hospital behind as you embarked on a new journey. You glanced out the window, feeling a swirl of emotions within you. Your eyes fell on the half-melted chocolate bar in your hand, and you took a small bite, savoring the sweetness. Everything was going to be okay. The door to the apartment creaked open, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. You stood just outside, clutching the edge of the synthetic hospital gown as you hesitated. Aizawa glanced back at you, his tired eyes softening slightly as he pushed the door open wider. He invited you in, his calm yet gruff tone carrying a hint of patience, as if he was accustomed to situations like this. Yamada, standing behind you, gently nudged you forward, encouraging you that it was okay and assuring you that the place was cozy. With their reassurance, you took a cautious step inside, your new sparkly shoes clicking softly on the hardwood floor. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, and the stillness made your chest tighten with nervousness. You paused, taking in the space before you. Aizawa's apartment was simple yet inviting, with warm tones and cool neutrals that created a sense of safety. The living room was the first thing you noticed, a small, comfortable space with a worn but cozy-looking gray couch. A couple of throw blankets were draped over the back, and a low coffee table sat in front, cluttered with a few books and papers. A television was mounted on the wall, looking like it hadn't been turned on in a while. The walls were lined with shelves filled with an assortment of books and scattered trinkets, giving the room a lived-in feel. Feeling a bit braver, you walked deeper into the apartment. To your left was the kitchen, a small but tidy space with dark countertops and light-colored cabinets. A round dining table in the corner was just big enough for 2 or 3 people, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Aizawa followed your gaze and walked over to the kitchen, gesturing for you to come closer. He explained that you could grab snacks from the cupboards or ask him to make something for you. You nodded slowly, still absorbing the information. The idea of having access to food whenever you wanted was surprising. Your gaze drifted to the cupboard filled with various snacks and ingredients, all within reach. Aizawa's words echoed in your mind, feeling almost unreal, like they were too good to be true. You weren't used to this kind of freedom, leaving you feeling a bit uncertain. Your head began to throb slightly. Aizawa noticed the shift in your expression and paused, his gaze softening as he checked on you. He asked if everything was okay, his tone gentle but concerned. You nodded again, forcing a small smile and assuring him you were fine. Aizawa didn't press for more details, which you appreciated. Instead, he suggested showing you the rest of the apartment, keeping his voice light. Yamada, who had been giving you space, grinned and added that you would love it there. Despite the lingering ache in your head, you followed them as Aizawa led you through the rest of the apartment. It was small, but it felt safe, and that made the knot of anxiety in your chest loosen just a little. Aizawa led you down a short hallway, stopping in front of a slightly ajar door. He pushed it open, revealing a small but cozy room. The walls were a soft shade of gray, and a single bed was pushed against the wall, with crisp white sheets and a simple dark blue blanket folded neatly at the foot. A small dresser sat against the opposite wall, next to a window that let in afternoon light, casting warm rays across the floor. The room was plain, nothing on the walls, no decorations, but it was clean and quiet, a peaceful little space. Aizawa informed you that this was your room now, his voice steady but softer than usual. He glanced around, almost apologetically, acknowledging that it was plain but encouraging you to decorate it however you liked to make it your own. You stepped inside, eyes wide as you took in every detail. The bed looked comfortable, the window bright and inviting, and the dresser seemed like it could hold many things you didn't have but could imagine filling it with. The room felt too nice, too clean, too perfect. You whispered that it was so cool, standing in the middle of the room, but as you looked around, guilt began to creep in. Turning to Aizawa, your expression was uncertain. Are you sure you want to give it to me? I might ruin it. Aizawa and Yamada exchanged a look, their expressions softening with a mix of sadness and concern. It was clear that your words struck a nerve. You fidgeted with your hands, suddenly feeling like you were asking for too much. You mentioned that you didn't mind sleeping in the closet, your voice barely above a whisper. Aizawa sighed softly and bent down to your level, his expression serious yet gentle. He assured you that you could never ruin anything, his kindness making your heart ache a little. He wanted you to have this room. It was yours, he insisted. Yamada crouched down beside Aizawa, his usual smile even softer as he nodded in agreement. He emphasized that you deserved this room and that they wanted you to feel safe here. You felt your eyes start to sting, a lump forming in your throat as you tried to process what they were saying. No one had ever talked to you like this before, like you were worth something, like you mattered. Aizawa then pointed out that it was only him who lived there, not both of them, and he glared at Yamada. Yamada urged Aizawa not to get into the logistics, but Aizawa insisted that it was just him, not a collective we. Blinking back the tears, you managed a small smile and whispered your thanks, your voice shaky. This seemed to break them out of their mini-argument as they looked down at you. Aizawa gave a small nod, his expression still serious, but there was a softness in his eyes. He told you there was no need to thank him, this was what you deserved at the very least. Yamada stood up, brushing off his pants before looking back at you with a bright smile, ignoring Aizawa's glare. He declared that you needed some new clothes, gesturing to the hospital gown you were still wearing. Aizawa admitted he didn't have anything that would fit you, rubbing the back of his neck. Yamada insisted you couldn't just wear that, and Aizawa responded that he was aware of that. A few minutes later, you found yourself wearing a shirt that was obviously too big for you, nearly reaching your knees. The sleeves hung far past your hands, and you had to push them up just to see your fingers. Yamada cooed, his eyes sparkling as he gently tugged on your cheeks, calling you cute with a voice full of affection. Aizawa rolled his eyes and swatted Yamada's hand away, muttering for him to knock it off, though there was no real bite to his words. You couldn't help it, a small giggle slipped out before you could stop it. The sound surprised you as much as it did them. Both Aizawa and Yamada looked at you, their eyes wide, before breaking into matching grins. Yamada nudged Aizawa, excitedly pointing out that you had laughed. Aizawa's expression softened even more, and he gave you a small, almost proud smile. He encouraged you to take your time getting used to the place and mentioned he would be in the kitchen cooking something. He told you to call out if you needed anything. With that, they left you alone in your new room. You stood there for a moment, taking it all in again. The quiet of the apartment, the soft bed, the big window that let in the golden light of the setting sun, it all felt so different from what you were used to. You walked over to the bed, climbing up onto it with some effort since it was a little higher than you expected. The mattress was soft, the blankets warm, and you found yourself drawn to the window. You crawled over and pressed your face close to the glass, staring out at the cityscape beyond. The buildings stretched up into the sky, and you could see the faint glimmer of lights starting to flicker on as the daylight began to fade. This could really be home. Maybe. The quiet of the room was broken by the sudden sound of the doorbell ringing. You sat up in your bed, your small body still wrapped in the oversized shirt Aizawa had given you. Curious, you slid off the bed, your feet landing softly on the floor. You tiptoed over to the door, carefully peeking out into the hallway to see what was happening. From your spot, you could see Aizawa walking toward the front door. He opened it, revealing a person holding a large bag. Aizawa took the bag with a simple nod, muttering a quick thanks before shutting the door behind him. In the kitchen, Yamada was perched on the counter, humming a tune to himself. When he saw the bag in Aizawa's hand, his hum turned into a full-blown song about how much he loved takeout. Aizawa shot him a look, raising an eyebrow and telling him to get off his counter, clearly used to Yamada's antics. A playful grin, Yamada hopped down, still singing his silly song. He was about to make his way over to the kotatsu when he caught sight of you peeking out from your room. His eyes lit up, and without missing a beat, he scooped you up into his arms, singing about you being their little guest as he spun around before setting you down by the kotatsu, still humming. As he placed you down, he winked and leaned in, whispering that takeout was way better than anything Aizawa could cook. Aizawa, now setting the bag of food on the table, shot him a half-hearted glare, telling him to stop putting ideas in your head. Yamada teased Aizawa, pointing out that all he could make was ramen. Aizawa huffed, ignoring the jab as he continued setting up the food. The two of them bickered back and forth, their playful banter already a familiar sight to you as they placed boxes and cartons of food on the table. You watched them with wide eyes, still trying to figure out this new place you found yourself in. Finally, Aizawa placed a small box in front of you, along with a carton of apple juice. He encouraged you to enjoy it, his voice a bit softer when he spoke to you. You stared at the box for a moment, hesitant. But your stomach growled, reminding you just how hungry you were. Slowly, you reached out and unwrapped the packaging. Inside was a burger and fries, something you'd never really had the luxury to eat before. You picked up the burger with both hands, taking a tentative bite. As soon as the flavors hit your tongue, your eyes widened. It was delicious, juicy, and warm, with just the right amount of everything. Before you knew it, you were devouring the burger, your hunger taking over. Each bite was better than the last, and it didn't take long for you to finish it. Yamada chuckled from across the table, his eyes crinkling with amusement as he pointed out the bit of burger sauce that had found its way onto your upper lip. Aizawa stood at the entrance of his apartment, arms crossed, staring down the mountain of shopping bags Nemuri was trying to drag through the door. She was huffing, struggling to squeeze them in without knocking something over, her face red from the effort. Aizawa remarked that he had only asked her to get some clothes, not to buy the whole department store, though the slightest hint of amusement tugged at the corners of his lips. Nemuri shot him a glare, still yanking on the handles, claiming it wasn't her fault the girl was too cute and looked good in everything. She insisted he had sent her on an impossible mission. The bags finally inched forward, but she was still struggling to get them inside when Yamada popped into the hallway. His eyes went wide at the sight, and he let out a low whistle as he walked over, commenting on the apparent shopping spree. Nemuri groaned, wishing it were a raid, and with one last tug, she fell back onto her. But as the bags finally cleared the doorway, Yamada snickered, but Nemuri narrowed her eyes at him, dusting herself off as she stood. She playfully warned him that if he kept laughing she would get her whip. Yamada instantly straightened up, a nervous chuckle escaping him as he darted behind Aizawa, seeking refuge. Aizawa shot him a sidelong glance, unfazed, reminding him he should know better than to ask. Nemuri rolled her eyes and turned her attention to you as you carefully stepped around the mountain of bags, your wide eyes glancing up at them before quickly darting to the side. You stayed quiet, observing, but Yamada gave you a wide smile. He remarked that Nemuri had missed a few things and that if he were shopping he would have definitely gotten more. Nemuri smirked and playfully nudged him with her elbow, claiming she had told him so. Aizawa, however, was not amused. He promptly whacked Yamada on the back of the head, earning a small yelp from him, and told him to stop encouraging her. Yamada rubbed his head, grinning sheepishly, while Nemuri laughed under her breath. Aizawa then muttered for everyone to grab a bag. Nemuri, Yamada, and Aizawa each grabbed a handle and started lugging the bags toward your room. You, still quiet but eager to help, tried pushing the last bag from behind, though it barely budged. The adults chuckled softly at the sight of you trying so hard, but together, they managed to get everything inside your room. The bags were dumped onto the floor, bursting with all the clothes Nomuri had bought. Bright colors, sparkly shoes, and cute accessories peeked out from the edges, making the small room look like a mini fashion store. You sat on your bed, legs crossed, watching them all with wide eyes as they chatted amongst themselves while starting to unpack the massive haul. You could hardly believe this was real. The way they joked with each other and effortlessly made you feel included was so warm, so different from anything you'd ever experienced. Nomuri held up a frilly dress, cooing over how adorable you would look in it. Yamada countered that it was way too frilly and suggested something cooler, holding up a tiny leather jacket with many zippers. Aizawa, sighing at their banter, folded up a pair of pajamas and reminded them that they were not turning you into a fashion icon, but rather needed to find practical clothes. Nomuri laughed and teased that you could be both. You watched the scene unfold, a small smile tugging at your lips. It was strange, more than strange, it was nice. You weren't used to this kind of casual happiness. It almost felt like you were a part of something, even though you didn't really understand why. For the first time in a long while, you felt like you belonged. Nomuri stood in the kitchen, an apron wrapped around her waist as she glanced down at you with a wide smile. She announced it was time to get cooking, grabbing some noodles from the pantry. You stood on a stool next to her, your eyes wide and focused, determined to help in any way you could. She handed you a bundle of noodles, explaining how to cook them, and you listened carefully, doing your best to follow her instructions. Nomuri praised you as you dropped the noodles into the pot of boiling water, careful not to splash yourself. She remarked that you were already better than the boys who didn't know how to cook, nodding toward the living room where Aizawa and Yamada were lounging on the couch. You giggled as you stirred the noodles, stealing a glance at the two men while Nomuri snickered beside you, clearly enjoying your inside joke. With her guidance, you carefully drained the noodles, making sure not to burn yourself. Clapped her hands and smiled, calling you a natural and reiterating that you were way better at this than them. You beamed with pride as Nomuri began plating everything. The delicious smell of the noodles filled the room, making your stomach growl a little. Just as she finished, Nomuri's playful grin returned. Without warning, she lightly kicked Yamada on the back of his head, announcing that dinner was ready. Yamada yelped, rubbing the back of his head, but he didn't say a word. He knew better than to talk back when it came to Nomuri's teasing. Instead, he groaned and stood up, pulling Aizawa off the couch with him. They both shuffled over to the table, sitting down as you followed with Nomuri behind you. She placed the plates in front of everyone, and soon you were all gathered around the table, enjoying the meal together. Nomuri stretched her arms above her head, letting out a satisfied sigh, claiming that the noodles after a long day of shopping were exactly what she needed. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, teasing that if only she put as much effort into her work as she did shopping. Nomuri smirked, her voice dropping into a playful tone. Dinner continued with a light atmosphere filled with laughter. Nomuri, still smiling, casually mentioned something new. She shared that she had received an invitation to a Facebook moms group while out shopping with Aizawa and Yamada both froze, their heads turning toward Nomuri in surprise. Aizawa cleared his throat, appearing slightly concerned, while Yamada looked at her with wide eyes, his gaze dropping to the table. Nomuri felt a sudden rush of emotions as she processed the reactions around her. Yamada's face turned pale, and he exclaimed in surprise, revealing his shock at the unexpected news. The realization hit you hard, causing your eyes to widen as the noodles you had been about to eat slipped from your chopsticks and fell back into the bowl. You turned your gaze to Nomuri, your expression mirroring the confusion you felt. In a moment of panic, Nomuri shouted, grabbing the nearest slipper and tossing it toward Yamada, who flinched and laughed nervously as he dodged the incoming object. Aizawa let out a sigh of relief, glad that the situation had not escalated further. "You really scared me there for a second," Yamada admitted, still trying to catch his breath. With an exasperated roll of her eyes, Nomuri explained the mix-up. She had been added to a group chat by some mothers while shopping with you, who mistakenly thought you were her daughter. Yamada's expression shifted to understanding as he nodded along, finally grasping the situation. You slurped your noodles, still processing the recent events, but the conversation had already moved on. In the midst of finishing the last bit of ssōmen, a small bang echoed from the front door. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to make everyone pause. You glanced around the table, spoon still halfway to your mouth. Yamada was the first to break the silence, looking at Aizawa with wide eyes and asking if anyone else had heard that. Aizawa shrugged, continuing to eat, suggesting it was probably just the wind. Everyone seemed to agree, and after a moment of silence, the conversation resumed. However, just as the noise faded into the background, another bang came, louder this time. Again, everyone stopped. Tension built as you stared at the door, but when nothing happened, everyone resumed eating. It became almost a rhythm: bang, pause, eat until Aizawa finally had enough. He grumbled, standing up and heading to the door. Yamada, naturally curious, followed closely behind, peeking over Aizawa's shoulder and asking who it was with a shaky voice. Aizawa squinted through the peephole and, with annoyance in his tone, said there was no one there. Before either of them could move, a voice came from behind the door, startling everyone. The voice demanded they open the door, followed by a maniacal laugh. Yamada shivered and stepped back dramatically, declaring that it must be a pervert, someone there to take pictures of his beautiful face and body while striking a ridiculous pose. Aizawa sighed and rolled his eyes as he unlocked the door, remarking that Yamada would have to pay someone to take photos of him. He opened the door, and both of them looked down to see Nizu. The small creature looked up at Aizawa, his expression unreadable. As calm as ever, Nizu turned his sharp gaze on Yamada with a slightly crazed smile. Yamada gasped and quickly bowed in apology, expressing that he had some troubling encounters in the past that had left him traumatized. Aizawa, with a deadpan expression, cut him off, rolling his eyes as he stepped aside to let Nizu enter the apartment. Nizu padded into the room, his tiny feet making barely a sound as Aizawa and Yamada followed. Aizawa, curious, asked what brought Nizu there. Nizu casually mentioned he had heard the news about the adoption. Aizawa's eyes narrowed as he glared at Yamada, who immediately raised his hands in defense, insisting it wasn't him this time. As they entered the living room, you sat on the couch with Namuri, your legs swinging back and forth. You blinked in confusion as the three of them approached. Nizu looked over at you and smiled, greeting you. Your eyes widened as you glanced around the room, searching for the source of the voice and whispering in surprise. Namuri, holding back laughter, urged you to look down. Slowly tilting your head, you finally spotted the tiny creature standing at the edge of the living room, your jaw dropping in disbelief. You asked Namuri what it was, completely baffled. Namuri waved her hand dismissively, and you turned to Yamada, asking who Nizu was. Seizing the opportunity to regain some favor after his earlier slip-up, Yamada stood up straight and proudly proclaimed that Nizu was his boss. You stared at him, your expression shifting to one of pity as you softly asked if things were really that rough for him that he had to work for animals. Namuri burst out laughing, slapping her knee as she struggled to catch her breath. Even Aizawa, usually stoic, turned his head away, laughing into his hand, shoulders shaking with amusement. Yamada's face turned bright red as he protested, trying to explain himself but only fumbling further, which made everyone laugh harder. He insisted it wasn't just him, Nizu was Aizawa's boss too. Eventually, after Namuri wiped tears from her eyes and Aizawa composed himself, everyone settled around the couch, with Nizu climbing into a chair across from you. The laughter faded, replaced by a more serious atmosphere. You shifted uncomfortably, feeling the contrast as everyone turned their attention to you. Confused, you waited until Nizu cleared his throat and began in a professional tone, ready to get started. Nizu's beady eyes glinted with curiosity as he leaned forward, turning to Aizawa and asking about your quirk. The question hung in the air, creating a tense silence. You glanced up at Aizawa, wondering what he would say. Aizawa crossed his arms, his brows furrowing as he admitted he didn't know, unsure if you had developed one yet. The atmosphere felt heavy, and you sensed the weight of the conversation resting on you as everyone sat quietly, pondering the unknown. But, of course, Namuri wasn't one to let the mood stay serious for too long. She waved her hand dismissively and grinned, suggesting that the girl they were discussing was probably just a late bloomer. Leaning back in her seat, she added that there was no need to stress, as the girl was already perfect as she was. Yamada nodded enthusiastically, agreeing that kids these days took their time and that the girl was building up to something amazing. Nizu tapped his chin thoughtfully before looking back at Aizawa. He suggested that it wouldn't hurt to have her checked by a doctor, just to ensure everything was all right. Aizawa sighed but nodded, admitting that he had planned to do that sooner or later. You stayed quiet, unsure of what to make of the conversation. It felt strange hearing them talk about you, about quirks, doctors, and things you didn't quite understand yet. Nizu then shifted the conversation, asking Aizawa if he had decided on a kindergarten for you yet. Aizawa hesitated, glancing in your direction. He admitted that he wanted you to adjust first before enrolling you somewhere. Nizu nodded in understanding and then turned his gaze to you, asking if you would like to go to school. For a moment, the room seemed to blur, and your head started to pound. Their voices faded into the background as something cold brushed the edges of your mind. You blinked a few times, returning to the present. You nodded eagerly, pushing aside the strange memory and expressing your desire to go to school. Nizu smiled at your enthusiasm and glanced back at Aizawa, who chuckled in response. Yamada perked up, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, pondering where to enroll you. They discussed various options until they settled on a prestigious kindergarten Shujin academy. Aizawa nodded, satisfied, and said he would start preparing everything tomorrow. Nizu looked pleased with the decision, but then his expression shifted as he coughed and asked Aizawa if he could speak to him alone for a moment. Aizawa raised an eyebrow but ultimately followed Nizu out of the room, leaving a tension in the air. You glanced after them, feeling a little unsettled. Nemuri's eyes narrowed suspiciously as she watched them leave. She nudged Yamada with her foot, asking what he thought that was all about. Yamada shrugged, clueless. But before you could dwell on it, Yamada grinned and suddenly picked you up from under your arms, twirling you around in the air. You squealed in surprise, bursting into giggles as he asked if you were excited to go to school. You nodded, laughing in agreement. After a few more twirls, Aizawa and Nizu returned to the living room. Nizu, ever polite, bid his goodbyes to everyone and gave you one last look, his eyes twinkling with something you couldn't quite place. With that, he left, his small form disappearing through the door. Aizawa stretched, letting out a deep sigh as he turned back to you. He told you it was time to go to bed since there was a lot to do tomorrow. Nemuri and Yamada groaned in unison, clearly not ready for the night to end. Aizawa shot them both a glare, suggesting they could leave his house if they wanted to stay awake. Immediately, Nemuri and Yamada quieted down, mumbling under their breath as they got comfortable on the extra futon and couch. Aizawa shook his head at them, clearly used to their antics, before walking over and scooping you up into his arms. You yawned, leaning into him as he carried you to your room. He set you down gently on the bed, tucking the blankets around you snugly. With a soft pat on your head, he stood up to leave, but not before flipping on the nightlight he had bought just for you. The soft, comforting glow filled the room as your eyes started to grow heavy. You watched Aizawa close the door quietly, your eyelids fluttering shut as the gentle hum of the nightlight lulled you to sleep. You blinked your eyes open to the soft sound of someone calling your name. Rubbing your eyes groggily, you saw Aizawa sitting on the edge of your bed, gently shaking you awake. He looked calm, his usual stern face softened by the early morning light filtering through the curtains. He greeted you with a warm, "Morning, kid," and told you it was time to get up. You yawned, stretching your arms above your head as Aizawa rubbed your back softly. It felt nice, a warmth you weren't used to, like this was your own little family. You blinked a few times, trying to wake yourself fully, and looked at him curiously, asking what you were doing today. He told you that you were going to pick out your school uniform, which made you sit up straighter, excitement bubbling over as you fired off questions one after the other about the uniform. Aizawa smirked, ruffling your bedhead and telling you to slow down as he got you ready. Before you knew it, he picked you up effortlessly and carried you to the bathroom. Setting you down, he unfolded a little stool he'd gotten just for you, so you could reach the sink properly. You noticed something new, a pink toothbrush with a cat face on it, sitting next to his blue one, along with strawberry-flavored toothpaste just for you. You looked at Aizawa with a thankful smile as he applied toothpaste to his brush. He nodded at you with a quiet hum of acknowledgement. With your tiny hands, you grabbed your own toothbrush and began to brush your teeth alongside him. After you finished brushing, Aizawa lifted you off the stool, and the two of you made your way into the living room. But when you got there, both of you froze, staring at the chaotic scene in front of you. Nemuri was hanging upside down off the couch, drool dripping from her mouth, while Yamada was sprawled out like a starfish on the futon. You glanced up at Aizawa, noticing the disgusted expression on his face as he observed the chaotic duo. You tugged at his pant leg, making him look down at you's expression softening instantly. He crouched down to your level, asking what was up. You pointed toward the mess of Nemuri and Yamada, wondering about their state. Aizawa stifled a laugh behind a cough, the corners of his mouth twitching. He saw this as the perfect opportunity to leave a lasting impression on you. With a serious expression, he nodded solemnly, affirming that he always helps out the less fortunate. You looked at the two heroes, then back at Aizawa, your little face filled with understanding. You suggested that maybe you could sell some of the clothes Nemuri bought you so they could have money too. Aizawa's eyes widened slightly, and he quickly shook his head, insisting that they liked being poor and urged you not to look at them. You nodded, satisfied with his explanation, and he ushered you into the kitchen before the other two could wake up, a small smirk tugging at the edge of his lips as he glanced back at their snoring forms. He felt certain that he was the only role model in your life. You sat on the counter, your feet swinging back and forth as you watched Aizawa mix the pancake batter. The sound of the whisk hitting the bowl and the quiet hum of the kitchen created a peaceful atmosphere, filling the small space with warmth. Every now and then, Aizawa glanced at you, a subtle hint of amusement in his eyes as you observed him at work. He then walked over to the fridge, grabbed something from inside, and handed it to you without a word. You took the item, looking at the bright pink packaging with curiosity. An animated cow was printed on the front, its cartoonish smile staring back at you. You asked what it was, tilting your head. Aizawa looked up from the pancake batter and explained that it was strawberry milk. Your eyes widened in surprise as you admitted you had never had it before. Aizawa paused, his usual unreadable expression faltering for a moment, replaced by a hint of something sadder, though it was barely noticeable. Without a word, he walked back over to you, took the carton from your hands, and pushed the straw into the box. He quietly handed it back, saying that if you liked it, you could have as many as you wanted. You blinked up at him, surprised, and he nodded, patting your head softly before returning to the stove to continue making the batter. You stared at his back, feeling warmth in your chest. There was something about the way he said that it made you feel cared for, more than you had ever expected. Taking a small sip from the straw, the flavor hit your tongue, tasting like the sweetest thing on earth. It was not just the milk, but the memory you were creating right now. As you continued sipping your milk, Aizawa juggled cooking eggs, sausages, and pancakes, all in his usual calm and collected manner. He glanced over at you, giving you the simple task of toasting the bread, which you did happily while sitting on the counter. Time passed quietly as the two of you worked together to make breakfast. Soon, everything was ready, and Aizawa began setting the table, placing all the plates around the kotatsu. After putting down the last plate, he walked over to you, scooping you up from the counter effortlessly and setting you down at the table. You looked across the room at Nemuri and Yamada, who were still fast asleep in their awkward, uncomfortable-looking positions. Nemuri was upside down, and Yamada was sprawled out on the floor. Aizawa grumbled as he walked over to them. With no hesitation, he kicked both of them gently and yanked away the blankets and pillows, commanding them to wake up. Yamada yelped, rubbing his side as he sat up groggily, while Nemuri rolled off the couch with a soft thud. They both mumbled something about rude awakenings as they eventually got up, stretching before shuffling toward the table to join you and Aizawa. As everyone sat down, Aizawa crossed his arms and looked at them both with a deadpan expression. He expressed his hope that they would finally return to their homes today, stating that he was done babysitting them. Yamada feigned hurt, claiming that Aizawa had been babysitting him his whole life, and Aizawa glared at him, expressing regret every time Yamada said things like that. Nemuri and Yamada burst out laughing, clearly unfazed by Aizawa's bluntness. But before they could continue their playful banter, you piped up, your voice filled with desperation, pleading for them not to be sent back. Both Yamada and Nemuri turned toward you, their eyes softening with affection, clearly touched by your words. They exchanged proud looks, thinking you wanted them to stay with you. Yamada spoke up first, clutching his chest dramatically, expressing how much it meant to him that you cared. But then you continued, explaining that the streets were cold and there weren't many places for homeless people to go. Nemuri and Yamada froze, their chopsticks suspended mid-air. Yamada turned sharply to Aizawa, his mouth hanging open in shock, while Nemuri glared at him, clearly demanding an explanation. Nemuri asked Aizawa what he had been telling you, her voice dangerously calm. Aizawa remained unfazed, casually eating his breakfast without even looking up. He dismissed their concerns, assuring them that everything would be fine. You nodded, trusting Aizawa's words, and returned to eating your breakfast while Yamada and Nemuri exchanged bewildered glances. After a moment of stunned silence, they both sighed, deciding to let it go, not wanting to get on his bad side. However, Yamada did glare at Aizawa, vowing to get his revenge one day. You crouched down, carefully fastening your jelly platform shoes. The pink straps gleamed in the morning light, and you gave them a quick once-over before standing up. Aizawa waited by the door, arms folded with a hint of impatience. Once you finished adjusting your outfit, you ran over to him, grabbing his hand tightly. His fingers closed around yours in a comforting grip. He asked if you were ready to go, his voice steady but warm. You chirped in affirmation, and he opened the door for you. The fresh air greeted you both as you stepped outside, the city's bustling energy welcoming you. After a bit of walking, you arrived at a massive marketplace filled with colorful stalls and bustling crowds. Aizawa led you to a blue shop packed with various uniforms. As you entered, an elderly lady at the counter looked up with a welcoming smile, greeting you both and asking if you were there to get some clothes for the new school year. Aizawa nodded and approached the counter to speak with her while you stayed back, looking around in wonder at the sea of colors, with uniforms of all shapes and sizes neatly arranged. As you wandered into an aisle filled with uniforms, you felt a gentle tap on your shoulder. Turning around, you saw a boy with striking white and red hair. He greeted you with a friendly but reserved tone. An awkward silence settled between you until he spoke again, mentioning that you were in his way. Apologizing, you quickly moved aside, and he asked which school you were attending. Excitedly, you replied that you were going to Shujin Academy. The boy's eyes widened in surprise as he revealed he was also attending that school. You beamed at him, hoping you would be in the same class. He nodded enthusiastically, grabbing your hand and leading you from aisle to aisle. He helped you find the right uniform and shoes, sharing tips on what to buy. As you looked over the options, you complimented his unique hair, which made him stiffen momentarily before relaxing and giving you a shy smile. Just then, a tall figure loomed behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Startled, you looked up to see a stern-looking man with a powerful presence. The man addressed the boy as Shoto and inquired about you. Shoto sighed and explained that you were a girl he met who would be attending the same school. The man scrutinized you with a sharp gaze, making you feel small and vulnerable as he questioned your suitability for the prestigious academy. You felt a lump in your throat as his harsh stare made your eyes sting. Before you could react further, you were lifted off the ground by Aizawa, who held you firmly in his arms. He glared at the man, now known as Endeavor, and questioned his intimidating behavior toward young students. Endeavor's gaze sharpened as he recognized Aizawa, who remained cold and unyielding in his demeanor. Endeavor grumbled before calling for Shoto, who threw you one last glance before following his father out of the shop. Aizawa looked down at you, concern evident in his eyes. You nodded, though your admiration for him shone through. He had been so cool in that moment. Aizawa's stern demeanor softened slightly as he turned away from you, and you noticed a subtle movement of his hand, as if he was wiping something away. He quietly acknowledged his own coolness and suggested that you get your uniform before showing Endeavor's son who was boss. After a successful trip to the marketplace, you and Aizawa arrived home, both laden with shopping bags. Inside were your new school uniform, shiny shoes, and a fresh backpack, all neatly packed and ready for the big day. Aizawa carried the bags to your room and set them down gently. As you excitedly tore open the bags, each item sparked a new wave of enthusiasm. You exclaimed about your excitement for school, bouncing in place. Aizawa chuckled softly and affectionately ruffled your hair, sharing in your joy. The rest of the day seemed to drag on, and though you enjoyed watching TV together, your thoughts kept drifting back to school. You wished the hours would fly by so you could start your new adventure. When it was time for bed, Aizawa scooped you up and carried you to your room. He gently tucked you in, ensuring you were snug and comfortable. He reminded you to get a good night's rest, knowing your excitement would need energy for the next day. You nodded sleepily, closing your eyes as Aizawa gave you a final reassuring pat on the head. He left the room, closing the door behind him, but not before turning on the nightlight he had bought for you. As soon as you heard the door click shut, you peeked one eye open to make sure the coast was clear. With a soft sigh, you looked out the window, your mind buzzing with thoughts of the upcoming school day. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, but despite your best efforts to stay awake, your excitement slowly gave way to sleep. Soon enough, your eyelids grew heavy, and the anticipation of tomorrow's adventures carried you into a peaceful slumber. You hoped to become good friends with Shoto. You were still deep in sleep when the soft sound of voices stirred you from your dreams. Eyes closed and half awake, the familiar murmurs grew clearer. Even though the words were muffled, you could make out who was speaking. As the final bell rang, you slowly packed your things, still preoccupied with what had happened earlier with Shoto. Guilt gnawed at your chest as you recalled the betrayed look on his face when Haruko confronted him. You couldn't shake the feeling that you had messed up somehow. He had looked so upset when he ran out of the classroom, and you hadn't even had the chance to explain yourself. When you stepped outside, you immediately spotted Yamada and Aizawa standing by the school gates, waiting for you. Yamada waved at you with his usual energy, while Aizawa stood beside him, arms crossed and looking calm as ever. As you trudged toward them, Yamada's smile faltered, and Aizawa's sharp eyes focused on you, noticing your drooping shoulders and the frown on your lips. Aizawa crouched down to ruffle your hair, his voice calm but laced with concern. He asked what was bothering you. You glanced up at him, quickly looking away as you tried to force a smile, mumbling that nothing was wrong even though you knew it sounded unconvincing. Yamada exchanged a glance with Aizawa, both clearly not buying your act. This morning, you had been so excited, practically bouncing on your way to school, but now your mood had shifted completely. They decided not to press you further, at least for now. Instead, Yamada grinned and lifted you into the air, suggesting a trip to the park. Aizawa nodded, agreeing that the park sounded like a good idea. You felt a little lighter as you sat on Yamada's shoulders, gripping his untamed hair for balance. They were trying hard to make you feel better, and you appreciated it, even if your heart still felt heavy. The park sounds nice, and a small smile tugs at your lips. Yamada exclaims that the park is the destination, marching ahead with you riding on his shoulders, bouncing slightly with each step. Aizawa follows behind, his calm presence reassuring. You lean forward a bit, resting your chin on Yamada's head, trying to push thoughts of Shoto and Haruko to the back of your mind as you focus on the moment. Maybe the park will help you forget at least for a little while. The sun beams down warmly as you arrive at the park, its light illuminating the sprawling green space. The park is a mix of bright, colorful playground equipment and open fields. The small pond glimmers in the distance, and the air is filled with the sound of laughter and children running around. You spot a large climbing frame ahead, one of the main attractions, with ropes, a rock wall, and a twisty slide at the top. Turning toward Aizawa and Yamada, your eyes widen with excitement as you point to the climbing frame and ask if you can play on it. Aizawa nods, his usual calm expression softening as he advises you to be careful, his voice gentle but firm. Before you can respond, Yamada butts in with his trademark enthusiasm, encouraging you to have fun and giving you a thumbs up. You smile and nod at them both before taking off running toward the climbing frame, your feet kicking up dust behind you. As you make your way to the climbing wall, Aizawa and Yamada take a seat on a nearby park bench. A woman sitting next to them casts a disapproving glance in their direction before scoffing and moving to another bench. Neither Aizawa nor Yamada seems to notice, too focused on watching you play. Determined to conquer the mini rock climbing wall, you begin your ascent. Halfway up, you hear a soft, meek voice from somewhere nearby, trembling with fear. A harsher voice cuts through the air, and you freeze on the wall, your heart skipping a beat. Is that bullying? Remembering what happened with Shoto earlier, a surge of determination runs through you. You have to do something good to make up for it. With that thought in mind, you jump off the climbing frame and follow the voices. Rounding the corner, you spot 5 boys. One stands alone, looking miserable, while 4 others tower over him, ignoring anything he tries to say as they mock him. You cross your arms, your eyes locking onto the boy with green hair. Tears are welling up in his eyes, his face red with frustration and embarrassment. His head is bowed as the boys yell at him. You walk over and tap him gently on the back. The boy flinches before turning around, his eyes widening as he sees you. You smile warmly, trying to ease his nerves and introduce yourself. He stammers his name, his face growing even redder as he struggles to speak. Izuku hesitates for a moment but eventually reaches out to shake your hand, letting out a small yelp as he does. The sound catches the attention of the group of boys, who stomp over to the 2 of you, looking annoyed. Your heart drops as your gaze meets one of the boys leading the group. Recognizing the familiar spiky blonde hair and scowl, you realize it's Katsuki. His eyes widen in recognition, and he jabs a finger in your direction, shouting that you're the loser from the mall. You sigh, already tired of his antics, and greet him with a deadpan response. The entire group freezes, and you hear Izuku stutter in surprise. Katsuki's face turns an even deeper shade of red as he snarls, demanding to know what you just called him and claiming he could get a girlfriend if he wanted to. You roll your eyes as he starts ranting, tuning him out until he blurts something out that catches your attention. He mocks Izuku, and you feel a pang of sympathy for him. One of Katsuki's friends pipes up, teasing that Izuku should introduce them to his girlfriend. Izuku squeaks out a flustered denial, but his voice is drowned out by the boys' laughter. That's when something inside you snaps. You can't stand seeing Izuku like this, and without thinking, you grab his hand and declare that he is your boyfriend, challenging the boys and asserting that they are just angry because they couldn't get a girlfriend even if they tried. Everyone freezes. The laughter stops, and you can feel Izuku's hand tremble in yours as his face turns an even brighter shade of red. Katsuki's eye twitches, and he yells at you, demanding to know who said you could call him by his first name. You cross your arms and stick your tongue out at him, insisting that girls don't like meanies, and that's coming from a girl. Katsuki's face twists with fury, but before he can say anything else, you turn on your heel, still holding Izuku's hand, and drag him away. You lead him under the climbing frame, where you both sit down on the shaded grass. The frame towers above you, made of sturdy wooden beams, with ropes and ladders crisscrossing beneath the twisty slide. You glance at Izuku, who is sitting beside you, still blushing furiously and fiddling with his fingers nervously. You ask if he is okay, tilting your head in concern. He gulps and looks up at you, then quickly snaps his gaze back down to his hands, asking if you meant it when you called him your boyfriend. Surprised, you smile, completely misunderstanding his question, and affirm that you consider him a friend. Izuku's eyes widen, and he looks up at you with a sudden burst of determination, declaring that he will be the best boyfriend. He mentions that his mom watches a lot of soap operas, so he knows what to do. You stare at him, a little baffled, but decide to go along with it. You mention that your dad watches a lot of crime dramas, offering to help if he needs it. Izuku looks slightly disturbed but quickly shakes it off, nodding seriously. The 2 of them sat under the climbing frame, completely misunderstanding each other's definitions of boyfriend and friend. As they continued to talk, both began to feel a little lighter than before. The sun had started to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange as YN and Izuku walked hand in hand through the park, searching for their parents. Izuku had been strangely adamant about holding YN's hand, and though it felt a little odd, YN didn't mind. They were friends after all, and friends helped each other, right? Suddenly, a woman with green hair appeared in front of them, her hands clasped together as she let out a soft, adoring sound. She bent down to YN's height, her expression filled with warmth. YN blinked up at her, confused for a moment before recognizing the familiar shade of her hair. She had to be Izuku's mom. Turning to look at Izuku, YN saw him flushed with embarrassment, trying to hide behind his bangs as his mother continued to gush. She asked with a bright smile, "And who's this, Izuku?" Izuku stammered, managing to say, This is YN, his voice quiet as he added, my girlfriend. YN tilted their head, not quite understanding why he looked so embarrassed, but before they could say anything, another woman suddenly appeared, slinging her arm around Izuku's mom. She had wild blonde hair and an even wilder grin. Kids these days, growing up so fast, she teased, her eyes landing on YN with recognition. Hey, aren't you that cutie from the mall? YN blinked and nodded, remembering her too. Mrs. Bakugo? She waved a hand dismissively, ruffling YN's hair as she laughed. Just call me Auntie Kit. We're practically family now. YN smiled at her, enjoying the warmth of her personality. Okay, Auntie. Mitsuki grinned and continued, so what's this I hear about Izuku being your boyfriend? YN nodded confidently. Yeah, me and Izuku are close friends. Both women cooed, looking down at the two of them as Izuku looked like he was about to faint from embarrassment. His mom muttered softly, young love, to which Izuku whined, Mom, you're embarrassing me. Mitsuki raised an eyebrow and glanced around. So, where are your parents, kid? Just as she said that, two tall figures approached from behind. Both women froze, their grips on YN and Izuku tightening as they glanced warily at the approaching men. The first man was none other than Aizawa, his dark eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Izuku's mom, being the gentler of the two, was the first to speak. How can we help you, gentlemen? Aizawa crossed his arms, looking first at them, then at Mitsuki, whose arm was still wrapped around YN's shoulder. His voice was gruff, no nonsense as usual. I'm here to take that child back. Both women's eyes widened in shock. Mitsuki instinctively pulled YN closer to her, as if protecting them from some unknown threat. Izuku, his face flushed and determined, jumped out in front of YN, throwing his arms out in a protective stance. You can't take my girlfriend away from me. Izuku shouted, his small body shaking but standing strong. Aizawa's jaw dropped, along with Yamada's, who had just caught up to him. Aizawa was the first to recover. What do you mean, girlfriend? Step away from my child. Mitsuki and Izuku's mom stood firmly in front of YN now, both ready to protect. Listen, sir, Mitsuki said, her voice challenging, if you leave now, we won't have any trouble. Aizawa looked even more irritated. His finger pointed directly at YN. I'm not leaving without my kid. Mitsuki rolled up her sleeves, preparing for a confrontation. Okay, come and get her, then. She snapped, her stance growing more aggressive as Izuku's mom tried to hold her back. Things were about to escalate when YN suddenly broke free from Mitsuki's grip, running toward Aizawa. They jumped into his arms with a wide smile. Hi, Dad. Everything stopped. Both women froze, their mouths open in shock. Izuku looked up at Aizawa and Yamada, his face a mask of confusion and fear. That's your dad? Izuku stammered, his voice barely audible. YN nodded enthusiastically. Hi, Dad. Izuku's mom blinked rapidly, her gaze flickering between YN and Aizawa. Are you sure, honey? You don't have to feel intimidated or scared. You can tell us. YN tilted their head, clearly confused. I'm not scared. Especially not with my dad. The two women exchanged glances, slowly piecing things together. Mitsuki rubbed the back of her neck, clearly embarrassed as she bowed slightly toward Aizawa. Sorry, sir. I just wanted to make sure. Aizawa gave her a gruff nod, brushing off the misunderstanding. It's fine. He then turned his attention to Izuku, who was peeking out from behind his mom's legs. Hey, what did you mean by girlfriend? Izuku opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, YN cut him off, proudly announcing, Izuku's my boyfriend. The women melted at YN's words, cooing, Aw, isn't that adorable? Aizawa sighed deeply, clearly out of his element with this whole situation. He rubbed his temples but didn't push the subject further, instead saying, all right, let's go. He turned to leave, Yamada falling into step beside him, but not before giving a friendly wave to the two moms. As YN was carried off, Yamada leaned down toward them with a grin. So, Izuku's your boyfriend, huh? He turned his gaze to Aizawa. Maybe we shouldn't let her come to this park anymore. To which Aizawa firmly nodded in agreement. YN felt their eyelids begin to drop as they leaned their head down on Aizawa's shoulder, blissfully unaware of how much chaos they had left behind. Is Yukuda first boyfriend? YN stood outside the classroom door, nervously clutching the hem of their skirt. The weight of their bag hung heavily on their shoulder, but even heavier was the container of cookies inside. They had stayed up the night before, carefully baking them, hoping they would show how sorry they were to Shoto. Though the day at the park with Aizawa and Yamada had helped soothe some of their worry, the thought of Shoto's hurt expression kept gnawing at them. They needed to apologize properly. The hallway was quiet, almost eerily so, the early morning light filtering in through the windows. The soft glow of the rising sun cast long shadows, making everything seem calmer, more peaceful, yet somehow more intimidating. The usually bustling school was silent, with only the distant sound of birds outside breaking the stillness. The air felt cool, crisp, and filled with anticipation. YN knew Shoto would be there. He was always early, like clockwork. They took a deep breath, silently praying that everything would go well. With one final exhale, they slid open the classroom door. As the door creaked open, YN peeled their eyes off their shoes to glance toward the desks. There, near the window, Shoto sat alone. The golden morning light streamed through the glass, casting a warm glow on his face and highlighting his dual-colored hair. He appeared lost in thought, his gaze distant as he looked out at the world beyond. The tranquility of the moment made him seem almost ethereal, and for a brief moment, there was hesitation. Then he turned. His mismatched eyes met yours as the door clicked shut behind you, and for a moment, neither of you moved. His expression was unreadable, though his gaze held a quiet curiosity. You quickly looked down, feeling shy under his stare, but you swallowed your nerves and stepped forward. Slowly, you approached his desk, each step feeling heavier than the last. Standing in front of him, you reached into your bag, pulling out a container of cookies with shaky hands. With as much care as you could muster, you placed them on his desk. Shoto glanced down at the container, his brow furrowing slightly, then back at you, his gaze questioning. Shoto listened as you began to speak, your voice barely above a whisper. You forced yourself to meet his eyes, your heart racing. You expressed your regret about what had happened the day before, explaining that you never intended to upset him. You emphasized how much you valued his friendship and hoped for his forgiveness. For a moment, Shoto simply stared at you, his expression inscrutable. Then, almost imperceptibly, his eyes widened slightly, and a faint blush dusted his cheeks. It was so subtle that if you hadn't been looking closely, you might have missed it. He nodded once, his movements deliberate, and carefully picked up the container of cookies. He expressed his gratitude quietly but sincerely, mentioning a conversation he had with his sister the previous night. She had reassured him that you likely meant no harm. He then apologized for his reaction. You immediately shook your head, insisting it was your fault for lying. Shoto, however, shook his head in response, claiming the fault was his for overreacting. This back and forth continued for what felt like an eternity, each of you insisting the blame lay with the other. Eventually, the absurdity of the situation made you laugh, breaking the tension in the air. Shoto tilted his head slightly at your sudden laughter, looking puzzled, but after a moment, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. You asked if that meant you were friends again, and Shoto's smile widened just a little as he assured you that you had never stopped being friends. Relief washed over you, and you beamed at him. Despite the strange start, things between you and Shoto felt restored, perhaps even a little stronger now. The peaceful moment was abruptly interrupted by a loud screech followed by the unmistakable sound of stomping feet. Both you and Shoto turned your heads toward the commotion, just in time to see Haruko storming over. Before you could process what was happening, she positioned herself right between you and Shoto, glaring at him with her arms crossed and eyes narrowed. Haruko scrutinized Shoto, and without missing a beat, she declared that he should find his own friend. Shoto blinked, confused by her words. Haruko continued, her tone sharp as she insisted he leave you alone. She stood there, hands on her hips, as if she had just won a major battle. You watched, wide-eyed, as the scene unfolded like a dramatic showdown. Haruko, fiercely protective as ever, was not about to back down. Meanwhile, Shoto looked puzzled, unsure how to respond to this sudden confrontation. You gently tugged on Haruko's arm, trying to calm the situation. You reassured her that both of them were your friends. Haruko turned to you, her face scrunched in dismay, demanding to know if she was your favorite. Shoto seemed to brighten at your words, pleased to be acknowledged as a friend. You offered a small smile, trying to keep the peace, and Haruko's expression softened a little. She reached into her bag and dramatically pulled out 2 pudding cups, shoving one into your hands. She grumbled that she had gotten 2 because they were on sale and insisted it was not because she thought you might like it or that friends share things. You couldn't help but laugh at her antics, shaking your head fondly as you thanked her. Haruko's face reddened slightly, and she turned away, flustered by the situation. You shot Shoto one last apologetic smile before settling into your seat, clutching the pudding cup. Shoto seemed unbothered, giving you a small, content nod as he returned to his seat by the window, clearly happy that things were okay between you. As the classroom began to fill with students and the morning buzz of chatter grew louder, you sat there, the pudding cup still in your hand, feeling a warm sense of belonging. Despite the chaos, it was comforting to know that you had friends, quirky, unpredictable friends, but friends nonetheless. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, time flew by, and before you knew it, December had arrived. The cold air nipped at your skin as you walked home, rubbing your hands together for warmth. You trailed behind Aizawa, who was carrying 3 massive bags of KFC, his usual expression unbothered, though the bags were clearly a handful. When you both finally arrived home, the excited chatter from the living room greeted you. Nizu, Nemuri, and Yamada were all lounging around, eagerly awaiting your return. As soon as they spotted Aizawa with the food, they cheered. Yamada exclaimed that the Christmas spirit was blessing them, and Aizawa huffed in response, setting the bags on the table and joking about his new nickname. Nizu chuckled as Nemuri began unpacking the food with a gleeful grin. You hurriedly kicked off your shoes and joined them, plopping down next to Nemuri as the warm, delicious aroma of fried chicken filled the room. It was a cozy evening, filled with laughter and good conversation, as the KFC spread transformed into a proper Christmas feast. Between bites of chicken, everyone engaged in their usual banter, creating a warm atmosphere that felt like a true family celebration. As the meal began to wind down, Yamada spoke up, his eyes twinkling mischievously. He reminded YN that their Christmas holiday was ending soon. YN groaned mid-bite into a chicken wing, swallowing reluctantly. Aizawa, having just finished cleaning off a chicken bone, raised an eyebrow and remarked that he thought YN liked school. YN leaned back in their chair and explained that while they did enjoy school, they preferred playing over learning, finding it boring. Nizu chuckled softly from his seat, shaking his head in amusement, and noted that things would only get harder from here, suggesting that YN would wish to return to kindergarten once they became a teenager. YN grumbled under their breath, pushing a drumstick around their plate as Nemuri laughed and ruffled their hair. She encouraged YN, stating that attending Shujin Academy earned her points with the other moms in the group chat, who were eager to set up playdates with their kids. Aizawa shot her a look of disbelief, questioning her continued involvement in that Facebook group. Nemuri responded matter-of-factly, raising an eyebrow and explaining that it was the only place where she could fangirl about YN and be understood. Yamada chimed in with a grin, asking when Nemuri would add him to the group. She gave him an incredulous look, pointing out that the group was for moms. Yamada dramatically waved her off, insisting he considered himself YN's mother. Aizawa audibly gagged at that, prompting laughter from everyone in the room. The night continued with jokes, storytelling, and teasing, the atmosphere filled with warmth despite the cold winter air outside. Eventually, after YN's stomach was full and their eyes were growing heavy, they said goodnight and made their way to their room. As YN climbed into bed, thoughts of the holidays coming to an end filled their mind, counting down the days until returning to school. Despite the dread of going back, the thought of seeing friends again made it feel sweeter. The morning sun bathed everything in a warm, golden glow as YN walked to school, the sky painted in soft pastels with a few scattered clouds drifting lazily by. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees lining the sidewalk, their leaves swaying and casting dappled shadows along the pavement. Birds chirped from the branches above, and the distant hum of the city buzzed peacefully in the background. 𝑦N's EV keychains swung playfully from their backpack, bouncing in rhythm with their steps as they clutched the straps with excitement, feeling lighter than usual. Suddenly, 𝑦N's name echoed through the peaceful air. Startled, they glanced around, scanning the busy street for the source. Their heart leapt upon spotting Haruko standing across the road, her usual calm expression softened by a hint of a smile. The sight of her made 𝑦N grin widely. Haruko approached, and 𝑦N cheerfully asked how she had slept. Haruko confidently declared that she had slept amazing because she was the best at everything. 𝑦N giggled and nodded in playful agreement, instinctively looping their arm through hers. Haruko's cheeks flushed slightly at the sudden closeness, but she didn't pull away, huffing softly in her usual tough girl manner. As they walked toward the school building, arms linked, the matching EV Evolution keychains on their backpacks bounced in unison, a small but precious reminder of their bond. The sun continued to shine brightly, casting long shadows as they made their way through the bustling courtyard, surrounded by students preparing for another day. The world felt just a little more colorful with 𝑦N's best friend by their side. Just as they were about to step into the classroom, a familiar voice called out from behind. It was soft yet clear, tinged with a calmness that immediately caught 𝑦N's attention. Shoto was jogging toward them, his bag bouncing lightly against his back. He greeted 𝑦N with a bright smile, his heterochromatic eyes lighting up. Then, his gaze shifted to Haruko, who was still latched onto 𝑦N's arm, her expression darkening the moment she saw him. Her glare could have burned holes through him. Shoto politely greeted Haruko, but she responded with nothing more than a scoff, tightening her grip on 𝑦N's arm and pulling them into the classroom. Despite the cold reception, Shoto smiled softly to himself, clearly unaffected by Haruko's obvious disdain. He followed behind, keeping pace with them, blissfully unaware of the tension radiating from her. The three of them headed to the back of the class, unlocking their lockers to stow their bags. 𝑦N's locker was filled with small reminders of home pictures of friends and little notes they'd kept, colorful stickers covering the inside door. Haruko's locker was almost empty, except for a lone, rugged keychain and a few band posters pinned against the back wall. Shoto's locker was neatly organized, holding no decoration aside from a single framed photo of his siblings and a small bonsai plant sitting on the shelf. 𝑦N did a double take, wondering how he even got that in and if they were expensive. As 𝑦N closed their locker, Shoto appeared beside them, holding out 3 small, individually wrapped caramels. He explained that his sister said caramel was the best kind of sweet for winter and that he got one for each of them. 𝑦N accepted one gratefully, unwrapping the candy slowly before popping it into their mouth. The rich, sweet flavor melted instantly, and 𝑦N hummed in delight, thanking Shoto with a smile. Haruko snatched her caramel from him without a word of thanks, but Shoto didn't seem to mind. In fact, he looked almost pleased. It appeared his research the previous night on how to be a good friend was paying off. Haruko grumbled that it tasted terrible, though she kept eating it, declaring that she would eat it because 𝑦N was Shoto's friend and she was a nice person. With that, she walked off toward her desk, her gruff declaration trailing behind her. 𝑦N patted Shoto on the back, smiling softly, assuring him not to take it personally, as Haruko actually really liked the caramel. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Sensei Tanaka entered the classroom, her booming voice urging everyone to take their seats. As you and the others shuffled to your desks, Shoto stole one last glance at you and Haruko. A small, content smile tugged at his lips before he turned back toward the chalkboard. His first friends. You reached into your bag, pulling out your large Pikachu pencil case, which was stuffed with felt-tip markers and gel pens. Just as you were about to grab your favorite pen, you noticed Shoto standing in front of your desk, holding his canvas. His expression was calm, but there was an expectant glint in his mismatched eyes. He asked if he could draw you, his voice steady yet curious. Before you could respond, Haruko suddenly jumped in, stepping between you and Shoto. She wore a smug smile as she declared that she and you were already partners, waving him off as if the decision was final. Just as Shoto opened his mouth to protest, Sensei Tanaka appeared behind the three of you, her face beaming with excitement. She clapped her hands, expressing her delight that the class was uneven and that you three had taken the initiative to form a group. Before any of you could speak, she placed shiny gold star stickers onto your foreheads. Haruko's eye twitched as she snapped her pencil in half, barely containing her frustration, while Shoto looked absolutely pleased, as if things were going just the way he wanted. It was a warm, sunny day at the playground, the bright rays of the sun casting long shadows on the ground as you sat on the swing, the soft creak of the chains the only sound filling the brief silence. The warmth of the day contrasted with the worry bubbling in your chest, though the sweet taste of the small cakes Haruko had brought softened it just a little. Haruko had made sure to remind you that she only brought them because she had extras, not because she had thought of you. She stood behind you now, giving the swing a gentle push. You looked around the playground absent-mindedly, scanning the area for any sign of Shoto, but instead, all you saw were the familiar faces of your classmates, laughing and playing, none of them seeming to share the confusion and worry you felt. Your thoughts swirled in your mind, wondering where he could be. Suddenly, the swing stopped. Haruko stomped over in front of you, hands on her hips, glaring down at you with a huff. She demanded to know why you weren't screaming like before when she pushed you. You blinked up at her, pulling yourself from your thoughts and apologizing, explaining that you were just thinking too hard. It had been a few days since Shoto was last in school, and you couldn't help but feel worried, though you tried to suppress the feeling. Haruko flicked your forehead lightly, her expression unamused. She remarked that it was hard to believe you were thinking that hard since your quiz scores suggested otherwise. You glared at her, slapping her hand away, but then your gaze shifted, and your voice softened as you asked if she had seen Shoto, noting that it had been a while since he came to school. Haruko rolled her eyes dramatically, teasing that it had been great without him, but her usual playful tone didn't land the way it normally did. You whined for her to be serious, and although she initially insisted she was, she noticed your worried expression and decided to tone it down. With a sigh, Haruko's expression softened, and she sat down on the swing next to you, her fingers idly gripping the chains. She acknowledged that it had been a while since he last came to school but reassured you that he would probably come back soon, suggesting he might just be sick since it was fever season. You nodded slowly, trying to convince yourself she was right. But even as you sat there, gently swaying in your seat, a nagging feeling tugged at the back of your mind, like something was off. You couldn't shake the eerie sense that there was more to Shoto's absence than just a simple cold. 2 months passed before Shoto returned. You sat at your desk, your chin resting on your palm as you watched the lively classroom around you. Haruko sat in front of you, her chair turned backward, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she meticulously colored the margin of her workbook with various shades of hot pink markers. The class was bustling with energy, kids laughing and chatting, a group of them doodling on the chalkboard up front, while others played together on the puzzle piece rug by the windows. You sighed quietly, watching the scene, your mind half-focused on the light-hearted chaos in the room. Haruko glanced up from her book for a second, noticing your distraction before returning to her coloring. She casually mentioned that her mom said you could come over that weekend, and you eagerly replied that you would bring your Switch. Haruko added that she could borrow her mom's phone to play Pokemon Go, mentioning a nearby Pokestop. Your eyes lit up with excitement at the prospect. Haruko straightened up, clearly proud of herself, though she tried to hide it behind a smirk. Before you could say anything more, the classroom door slid open with a soft but noticeable sound, and in walked Sensei Tanaka. Immediately, you noticed something off. Tanaka's usual energy was missing. Her smile looked forced, and her walk was slow and hesitant as she made her way to the podium. She greeted the class with a strained laugh, announcing that she had an exciting announcement. As she spoke, the students began making their way back to their desks, their earlier chatter subsiding. Haruko flipped her chair back around, sitting properly as her eyes flicked toward the front. You, now more alert, couldn't shake the strange tension hanging in the air. Poor Taiyu had to sit in the front row, likely facing any challenges that came her way. Her thoughts trailed off as Sensei Tanaka spoke again, capturing everyone's full attention. She announced that an old friend was rejoining them, her voice higher pitched than usual, revealing her nerves. Many in the room had missed Shoto, and the atmosphere shifted as YN's heart skipped a beat in surprise. Sensei's gaze found YN at the back of the room, and she seemed to visibly relax upon seeing her. She suggested that YN catch Shoto up since it had been a while since he was last there, making her his buddy from that moment on. YN felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her, making her shift in her seat. She nodded slowly, unsure of what else to do. Sensei Tanaka smiled at her, relieved by her compliance, and expressed hope that everyone would treat Shoto with kindness. The teacher then stepped out of the room briefly, and the classroom erupted into whispers. YN caught snippets of confusion, curiosity, and gossip, but her mind raced with questions. Why was Sensei so nervous? Had something happened to Shoto? The uneasy feeling in her chest returned, stronger this time. Her thoughts were interrupted when the door slid open again. Sensei Tanaka walked back in, and this time, Shoto was with her. The room fell into complete silence. Shoto stood at the entrance, and YN's breath caught in her throat. His once calm and warm presence had been replaced by an icy aura that chilled the air around him. His face was expressionless, a mask of cold indifference. The new scar on the left side of his face was deep and jagged, a cruel reminder of something terrible. His mismatched eyes, once full of curiosity, were now distant and unreadable, like frozen glass. YN's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her skirt under the desk, her heart aching at the sight of him. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of recognition, something soft and familiar. She managed a small, hopeful smile, but Shoto's expression remained stone cold as he looked away, his face reverting to that unfeeling mask. Sensei Tanaka, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, spoke up again. She mentioned that since Shoto had been away for a while, YN had kindly volunteered to be his study buddy. She suggested moving their desks together to make it easier for them to talk. Shoto's gaze slowly lifted toward the teacher, and his next words were sharp and cold, cutting through the room like ice. He simply said no. Both Sensei Tanaka and YN froze at his tone. YN's heart sank as the weight of that single word crashed down on her. Her eyes began to water, but she blinked away the tears, forcing herself to stay composed. Maybe he was just having a bad day. Maybe he wanted to be alone. They had been best friends before. Sensei Tanaka, visibly flustered, nodded awkwardly and suggested that Shoto could sit at his old desk. She flashed YN an apologetic look as she ushered Shoto forward. He walked to his seat, his movements robotic and detached, his eyes fixed on the desk as though trying to shut out the world around him. YN waved at him weakly, but he ignored it, sitting down and staring straight ahead, his face unchanging. YN tightened her grip on her pen as she tried to focus on the lesson, convincing herself that everything would return to normal soon. It was lunchtime, and YN eagerly ran up to Shoto, pulling a reluctant Haruko along with her. Though Haruko wasn't thrilled about sharing YN with Shoto, holding YN's hand helped ease her frustration. As they reached the doorway, Shoto was just about to leave the classroom. YN called out to him, her voice full of excitement. She expressed how glad she was to see him again, her smile bright and hopeful. Shoto glanced at her briefly, his eyes cold, before brushing past her without a word. YN's face fell, her excitement draining, but she quickly tried to hide her disappointment. Determined, she pulled Haruko along and rushed after him. She suggested playing in their secret spot, trying to maintain her enthusiasm. Shoto came to an abrupt stop, catching YN off guard. Haruko, not expecting the sudden halt, bumped into YN's back. Confused, she looked up to see what was happening. Shoto turned around, and the look in his eyes sent a chill down YN's spine. His icy glare pierced through her, and she flinched involuntarily as he stepped closer. His voice was steady but dripped with venom as he declared that he was not her friend, had never been her friend, and would never be her friend. He told her to stop acting like they were close, calling it annoying. YN sat on the swings, gently kicking her legs back and forth as she talked to Izuku, who stood nearby, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. He had been acting a little different lately, quieter and more restless since their last meeting, but she brushed it off, deciding not to think too deeply about it. Eventually, they moved to the sandpit, sitting cross-legged as they discussed their recent worries mostly about Shoto. Izuku, usually quiet and reserved, had started to open up around her, listening intently. However, when she mentioned Shoto, she noticed a strange look cross his face, his brows furrowing slightly. The look passed quickly, and Izuku forced a strained smile, his freckled cheeks slightly pink as he focused on her words. Wyan expressed her confusion about Shoto's behavior, reflecting on how close they used to be. She wondered if the scar on his face had changed him somehow and felt a familiar pang of guilt in her chest. She didn't want him to be alone and questioned what she should do. Izuku hesitated before gently patting her on the back, his smile soft yet hinting at something deeper in his eyes. He suggested that perhaps Shoto was having a rough time, but that didn't give him the right to lash out at her. If he were in your shoes, he wouldn't stay friends with someone so rude. You nodded slowly, his words sinking in. You recalled Haruko saying something similar. However, you couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't mean it. It felt silly to think that way, but you couldn't help it. For a moment, you stared down at your hands, thoughts swirling around your friendship with Shoto. But then, you shook your head, a small smile forming on your lips. You decided not to dwell on it for too long and suggested having some fun instead. Izuku brightened at that, and together, you both jumped to your feet, eager to leave the heavy conversation behind. The rest of the afternoon was spent playing in the park, your worries forgotten for the time being. The swings creaked as you raced to see who could go higher, laughter filling the air as you kicked your legs with all your might. Izuku's shy grin grew wider with every passing minute, his confidence building as you teased him about being slow. Then, you both dashed over to the jungle gym, scrambling up the ladder and pretending the ground was lava, giggling as you jumped from bar to bar. When you finally tired yourselves out, you settled in the grass, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the park. Izuku picked a few daisies and handed them to you with a bashful smile. You laughed and fashioned a little crown out of them, placing it on his head, much to his embarrassment. His face turned bright red, but you could tell he enjoyed it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, you lay on the grass side by side, pointing out shapes in the clouds. It was peaceful, and for a moment, everything felt right. No Shoto, no worries, just you and Izuku, enjoying the simple fun of being together. Izuku glanced at you and remarked that this was better. You smiled and nodded in agreement. You glanced over at Izuku, who hopped off the swing with a small smile. You announced that you were going to get some water from the vending machine and asked if he wanted anything. Izuku shook his head, still gripping the chains of the swing. He said he was good but urged you to hurry back, expressing his desire to go down the slide. You nodded, laughing softly, and promised to be back in no time. With that, you turned and started running toward the vending machine, your footsteps kicking up small clouds of dust as you left the playground behind. The vending machine stood by the side of an old convenience store, nestled in a dimly lit alleyway. You had been here a few times before, but the narrow space always felt a little unsettling. Still, you shrugged off the eerie atmosphere, focusing on the cool drink waiting for you. As you approached the vending machine, the flickering streetlight overhead cast long shadows against the brick walls. The alley was quiet, save for the hum of the vending machine and the faint sound of cars in the distance. You took a deep breath, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up inside of you. The alley felt isolated, like a place people purposely avoided. You reached up, trying to press the top button for strawberry milk, but it was just out of your reach. Frustration bubbled up as you stretched on your tiptoes, arms straining. Just when you were about to give up, a rough hand appeared out of nowhere, pressing the button for you. The carton clattered down into the dispenser, but the sudden presence behind you made your skin crawl. You froze, your breath catching in your throat. Slowly, you bent down and picked up the carton, clutching it tightly. As you turned to face whoever was behind you, a tall figure stood before you, his face shadowed beneath a hood. His posture was stiff and unwelcoming, and as you glanced up, you saw his eyes peering down at you with a sharp, almost predatory gaze. His skin looked weathered, and his hands were scarred, veins visible as he clenched his fists. He twisted his lips into a smile that only made him look more menacing. You stammered a thank you, your voice trembling with unease. Instead of leaving, the man leaned down, snatching the carton from your hand with an eerie calmness. He straightened up, towering over you, and squeezed the carton tightly until it popped, milk spilling between his fingers. Your heart raced as you tried to take a step back, your mind screaming at you to run, to call out for Izuku. But before you could even part your lips, the man's hand was on you, cold and rough as it clasped tightly over your mouth. He whispered for you to be quiet, his voice cold and filled with malice, his face inches from yours. He told you to be a good girl, and he might consider not harming you. Tears filled your eyes as your body trembled uncontrollably. His grip was too strong, his presence overwhelming. You nodded weakly, fear gripping you tighter than his hand. He smiled again, his grin widening into something twisted, as though he was enjoying your terror. He hissed that they had been looking for you for a long time, your name dripping with venom. He mockingly asked if you wanted to go home, pushing a strand of hair behind your ear, and saying that your family missed you dearly. Your head began to throb, a dull pain spreading behind your eyes as his words echoed in your ears. The world around you started to blur, the alleyway twisting and shifting in your vision. Everything felt unreal, like a bad dream. You shook your head, trying to resist the dizziness that was quickly overwhelming you, but it was too late. The man's hand pressed tighter, and your limbs began to feel heavy, your knees buckling as your vision doubled. The last thing you heard before everything went black was the man's low murmur, noting your resistance. His voice faded, and the last thing you saw was his gloved hand reaching out toward you as the world slipped into darkness. Izuku sat on the swings, his legs kicking idly back and forth as he glanced around the playground. He tried to distract himself, watching the other kids laughing and playing with their friends. A small group ran around the slide, their giggles filling the air. But with each passing minute, his impatience grew. YN had been gone longer than expected, and a sense of unease began gnawing at Izuku's gut. After a few more minutes of waiting, he couldn't sit still any longer. Swinging to a stop, he stood up and dusted off his shorts. He called out for wine, his voice echoing across the playground, trying to shake off the growing anxiety as he headed toward the vending machine, following the path she had taken earlier. As he approached the alleyway, his footsteps faltered. The vending machine stood in the same dim light, but something felt off. His eyes caught sight of a crushed strawberry milk carton on the ground, the liquid spilled and staining the pavement. Izuku froze, his breath hitching in his throat. He muttered to himself that YN would never waste strawberry milk. She loved it too much. Why would it be crushed? His heart raced as the realization crept in like a cold wind. He looked around frantically, hoping to see some sign of her, something that would explain what had happened. Instead, his gaze landed on a small keychain on the ground, an EV keychain. His heart plummeted. She would never leave this behind. She loved this keychain. His fists clenched at his sides as dread pooled in his stomach. She wouldn't drop it so carelessly. Something was wrong. Something was really wrong. Panic set in, and his mind raced with thoughts, piecing together the clues. YN was in danger. He muttered to himself, still trying to hold on to hope that maybe she just went to get tissues to clean it up, but the truth became undeniable. His fists clenched tighter, and a tear slipped down his cheek. Regret and guilt crashed over him like a wave. Why did he let her go alone? If only he had a quirk, he could have protected her. Maybe Kaken was right, he felt useless. But then, something inside him snapped. This wasn't the time for self-doubt. YN needed him. Wiping his tears away with the back of his hand, Izuku's expression hardened with determination. He took off running as fast as his legs could carry him, desperate to find help. His chest burned, and his mind was a whirlwind of panic, fear, and guilt, but he refused to give up. He promised himself he would find her. Meanwhile, YN sat huddled in the corner of a dark, damp room, her knees pulled tightly to her chest as she clutched her hands together, trying to steady her trembling fingers. The room was cold, the chill seeping through the cracked walls, leaving her shivering uncontrollably. The only light came from the faint moonlight filtering through a small, grimy hole in the wall, casting long shadows across the floor. The place felt suffocating, with musty air clinging to the dampness that stained the peeling wallpaper. It was a room that reeked of abandonment. Her stomach growled, a painful reminder of how long it had been since she had eaten. She hugged herself tighter, desperate to feel any kind of warmth or comfort. With a quiet sigh, she slowly stood up, her legs feeling weak beneath her as she moved, wobbling slightly as she tripped over the uneven floorboards. Wincing, she waddled toward the door, her tiny fingers fumbling to slide it open. YN peeked outside, her heart pounding in her chest. The hallway was barely illuminated, only lit by the flickering colors from a TV in the next room. The light was off, but the TV cast enough of a glow to reveal a figure slouched on a worn-out couch. Empty bottles and crushed cans were strewn across the small table beside the figure, casting shadows that danced across the dirty floor. YN held her breath, praying they wouldn't notice her. She began creeping down the hallway, each step slow and deliberate. Her feet made barely a sound, but every creak of the old floorboards felt deafening. She kept glancing back, her eyes wide with fear, constantly checking to see if the person on the couch had stirred. Her pulse quickened, her body tense with anxiety. She was terrified of being caught. Finally, she made it to the small, worn-down kitchen. It was just as bleak as the rest of the house, cupboards hanging on their hinges, counters stained with grime, and a persistent smell of mildew that clung to everything. She quietly opened the nearest cupboard, her heart sinking as she saw how bare it was. There was almost nothing left except for a single crumpled package of crackers shoved into the back corner. Her eyes lit up at the sight of them, her stomach growling in anticipation. Finally, she reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the package, but just as she was about to grab it, a cold hand landed heavily on her shoulder. The voice behind her snarled, accusing her of trying to steal. YN froze, her heart dropping into her stomach. Fear gripped her as she was yanked backward by her wrist, and the crackers fell from her hand, tumbling to the floor. She looked up, her wide, tear-filled eyes meeting the angry gaze of the person towering over her. Her body trembled violently as she stammered an apology, filled with desperation, but it was met with a cold, unforgiving glare. The voice growled, expressing frustration at her apologies. With a shove, YN was thrown back into the dark room she had tried to escape. She hit the ground hard, her knees slamming into the floorboards. Pain shot through her legs as her skin scraped against the splintered wood. She bit her lip to keep herself from crying out, knowing better than to make a sound. The door slammed shut, plunging the room into darkness once again. YN lay there, her small body trembling, tears silently streaming down her face as she curled up on the cold floor. The words, "just until Monday," haunted her thoughts, echoing in her mind as she tried to find comfort in the darkness. She gasped as she jolted awake, her body trembling uncontrollably from fear. Your breath is ragged, and your wide eyes dart frantically around the room, still haunted by the nightmare you had just escaped. Blinking, your mind struggles to process your surroundings. It's not dark. You look down at your hands. They are clean and unmarked, no splinters, no blood, no bruises. As you look up, your heart races, a mixture of confusion and relief flooding your senses, until memories rush back, crashing over you like a tidal wave. A painful throb in your head makes you clutch it, the onslaught of emotions dizzying. Your vision wavers, and as you try to focus, you finally notice the strange, sterile space around you. The room is white, unnervingly so. The walls are padded, soft to the touch, offering no edges or corners. It is empty except for the cold floor beneath you, devoid of anything to anchor you. No windows, no furniture, just the unsettling quiet and that hollow feeling of isolation. The only break in the monotony of the padded walls is a large, fixed two-way mirror on the far side of the room, reflecting your fragile state back at you. You know someone is behind it, watching. Your heart clenches with desperation as you whisper hoarsely, calling out for Aizawa, your father, wondering where he is. You just want to go home. You grip the fabric of your dress tightly, your knuckles turning white as your eyes scan the room, searching every corner and surface for a clue, a way out, anything. But there is nothing. The padded walls seem to close in on you, pressing down on your fragile state of mind. The cold, sterile environment offers no comfort, only a creeping sense of dread gnawing at your insides. You pull your knees up to your chest and sit in the farthest corner of the room, trying to make yourself as small as possible, hoping to disappear. You wait. Time feels endless in this small space, each second dragging out painfully. Exhaustion weighs down on you, and your eyelids begin to droop. Just as you are about to let the darkness of sleep claim you once again, the sound of a door creaking open echoes through the room. Your head snaps up, eyes widening as you watch cautiously. Standing in the doorway is a tall, older man with a sharp presence. His face is lined with wrinkles, and his slowly graying hair is slicked back neatly. He is draped in dark, traditional robes that sway slightly with his movements. His eyes hold a calculating, cold gleam as they lock onto yours, sending a chill down your spine. He stands there, calm and composed, but there is something unnerving about the way he looks at you. His gaze seems to pierce right through you, dissecting your every move, every breath. He smiles, but it seems out of place for a man of his stature, though his smile looks oddly soft. He greets you, acknowledging that it has been a while since you last met. The sound of his voice sends a shiver down your spine, and your heart pounds in your chest. Your mind screams for you to run, to escape, but your body refuses to move, frozen in terror. He reassures you, saying there is no need to be afraid, claiming that he would never hurt family. His steps are slow and methodical as he approaches you, each step echoing through the padded room, sending a wave of dread crawling up your spine. You instinctively shrink back, pressing yourself into the soft wall behind you, desperate for distance as your eyes lock onto his. His cold, calculating gaze seems to warm as he looks down on you. That couldn't be right, could it? The figure before you loomed large, casting a shadow over your small, trembling form. He looked down, his sharp eyes gleaming with curiosity, a bitter smile creeping across his face. He murmured to himself, acknowledging your lost memories. It made sense, he mused, that you would have been overjoyed to see him again. His voice sent a shiver through you, and without thinking, you flinched as he commanded you to stand. Instinctively, your body obeyed, rising to your feet as if controlled by invisible strings. Confusion raced through your mind as you wondered why you had complied so quickly. It felt as if your body knew how to respond before your mind did. Then he turned slightly, muttering something to himself before softening his tone. He instructed you to stand up, calling you his daughter. His unsettling approval was evident as he nodded slightly, turning his back to you. He stated that his name was not important, only that he was your father, or at least would be. His words struck you like a punch to the gut, and suddenly, a sharp pain erupted in your head. You winced, clutching your temples as the throbbing intensified, each heartbeat sending waves of discomfort through your skull. Desperately, you shook your head, trying to push his words out of your mind. You cried out, insisting that he was not your father, that Aizawa was your dad. The pain became unbearable, your thoughts swirling chaotically. The throbbing in your head was relentless, and your knees buckled slightly as you struggled to remain standing. The man's expression barely shifted, but a flicker of disdain crossed his face as he listened to your desperate denial. He scoffed, turning toward the door with cold indifference, asserting that he was your father and that you would learn to accept it. As he reached the door, he paused, glancing back at you one last time. He mentioned that Kai had been waiting for your return and missed you dearly. Before you could process his words, the door slammed shut, leaving you alone in the sterile, suffocating silence of the padded room. Your vision grew foggy as exhaustion and pain overwhelmed you, your mind spinning with confusion and fear. Aizawa, Yamada, Nemuri, and Nizu stood solemnly around Officer Sato's cluttered desk, their faces grim and illuminated only by the soft glow of the desk lamp. Tension hung thick in the air, the weight of your disappearance pressing heavily on their minds. The case files about your abduction lay scattered across the desk, offering no leads, just cold facts and dead ends. Aizawa's eye bags were darker and deeper than usual, a sign of too many sleepless nights spent agonizing over what could have happened to his daughter. His shoulders slumped under the burden of worry, though he tried to remain composed. Yamada was not faring much better, his eyes were puffy and bloodshot, his usually energetic demeanor dulled by exhaustion. Nemuri looked hollow, her vibrancy replaced by a somber stillness, her own eye bags nearly matching Aizawa's. Even Nizu, typically calm and collected, was jittery, his fur disheveled and his small paws wrapped tightly around yet another cup of coffee. Officer Sato sat behind his desk, his face pale and worn, dark stubble shadowing his jaw. He hadn't left his desk in days, tirelessly combing through every lead and piece of evidence, but there was nothing to give them hope. Aizawa broke the heavy silence, his voice low and gravelly, edged with frustration as he noted the lack of evidence. Sato looked up, meeting Aizawa's weary gaze with shame. He wished there was something to offer, but whoever took you had vanished without a trace. Nemuri's brow furrowed with urgency as she asked about cameras in the alleyway, her voice serious and laced with concern. Sato shook his head, confirming that not a single camera had picked up anything suspicious. Yamada, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke with a mix of fear and determination, insisting they couldn't just stand around and do nothing. He clenched his fists, his eyes darting between his colleagues, emphasizing the urgency of finding you. Everyone nodded silently in agreement, the weight of his words hitting hard. Aizawa cleared his throat, his voice ragged as he acknowledged the urgency of the case. Nizu, despite his jittery state, took a deep breath and offered to call in favors with some heroes, promising that all hands would be on deck to bring you home safe and sound. The room fell silent for a moment, but the determination in Nizu's voice sparked a new flame in each of them. They were not going to give up until they brought you home, no matter what it took. Izuku sat on the swing, his small frame weighed down by immense sorrow. His usual bright expression had dulled, his eyes empty as he stared blankly at the ground. The swing moved gently with the wind, but he remained motionless, lost in the heaviness of what had happened. A few meters away, Inko stood with tear-filled eyes, her chest aching at the sight of her son. She clutched her heart and let out a pained sigh, her voice trembling with emotion. Mitsuki, standing next to her, rubbed her back gently, sharing the same heavy gaze as they looked at Izuku. Both mothers were bound by sorrow, knowing how deeply your disappearance had affected the children. Inko's voice wavered as she finally spoke. He had been like this since YN's disappearance. Inko struggled to finish her thought, the weight of her emotions choking her words. The silence between them was thick with unspoken fears and worries. Mitsuki nodded quietly, offering what little comfort she could by rubbing Inko's back. Inko's voice trembled as she shared her concerns. He had been refusing to eat and had taken to sleeping in the storage closet, claiming it was better that way. Overcome with emotion, she buried her face in her hands, and Mitsuki quickly wrapped her arms around her, providing solace. Inko managed to express her heartbreak, revealing that he believed All Might would be ashamed of him. She recalled how she hadn't seen him this low since the appointment with the quirk doctor. Mitsuki held Inko tighter, allowing her to release her grief. She could feel the depth of Inko's sorrow and the guilt that weighed heavily on her heart. Inko whispered that she thought fresh air might help him, but witnessing his pain was even more difficult. He had called himself useless and even discarded his hero analysis notebook. Mitsuki's eyes widened in disbelief at the news. He never went anywhere without that notebook. Inko nodded, wiping her tears as she continued. She had retrieved it from the bin, unable to let it go, and planned to return it to him when YN came back. But the thought of that moment only deepened her sorrow. Mitsuki shifted her gaze to Bakugo, who was kicking at the sand in frustration. She sighed heavily, feeling the weight of their worries. She admitted to Inko that Katsuki had been acting out more, picking fights with other kids. It was a different kind of trouble, one that concerned her deeply. Inko's heart ached as she watched Bakugo release his frustration. She sighed, expressing her concern for both boys, knowing they were carrying burdens too heavy for their young shoulders. She couldn't imagine what YN was experiencing, wherever she was, and the thought brought tears to her eyes. As they spoke, Izuku remained lost in his thoughts, staring at the ground beneath him. The world felt distant, and he struggled to process the sounds around him. The guilt and helplessness weighed him down, making even the simplest movements feel impossible. The swing creaked softly in the breeze, but he remained still, enveloped in his grief. Suddenly, he heard heavy footsteps approaching. He didn't need to look to know who it was. Bakugo stormed in front of him, frustration radiating from his every movement. Without hesitation, he grabbed Izuku by the shirt and shook him, demanding his attention. Izuku's dull eyes met Bakugo's fiery gaze, lacking their usual spark. Bakugo shouted at him to get a grip, insisting that just because something terrible had happened didn't mean he could act even more useless than usual. Izuku quietly asked to be left alone, but Bakugo's expression darkened further. He challenged Izuku, questioning whether YN would want him to wallow in self-pity. It wasn't his fault, Bakugo insisted. Izuku's eyes widened as something clicked within him. He struggled to find his voice, barely managing to ask Bakugo to repeat himself. Bakugo released him, and Izuku fell to the ground, his hands landing on the pebbles. For a brief moment, Bakugo's expression softened before he returned to his usual bravado, reiterating that it wasn't Izuku's fault. He urged Izuku to stop acting like a victim and to take action instead. Tears filled Izuku's eyes as he absorbed Bakugo's words. He felt the truth in them, no matter how harsh. YN needed him, and he couldn't afford to wallow in despair any longer. He whispered that Bakugo was right, his voice trembling as the tears fell. Bakugo huffed, crossing his arms as he looked down at Izuku, his voice losing some of its edge. He glanced back at Izuku one last time before walking away, leaving him with a newfound determination. Izuku sat on the ground, Bakugo's words echoing in his mind. His heart raced as tears streamed down his cheeks, but for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. Haruko sat alone at her desk, gripping the hem of her skirt tightly. The usual confidence she exuded was replaced by a cold expression as she fought against the sadness threatening to overwhelm her. In her hand, she held her cherished EV keychain, tracing its familiar shape with her fingers. It was the only thing keeping her grounded in a world that felt incomplete without YN. The rest of the class buzzed with energy, students laughing and chatting as if nothing had changed. They were unaware of YN's disappearance, their lives continuing in a normal rhythm. But for Haruko, time had stopped. The absence of her best friend left a heavy burden on her heart. Amid the lively chaos, a quiet presence approached her. Shoto stood silently, his expression as stoic as ever. He asked softly where YN was, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. Haruko remained silent, unable to respond. She bit her lip hard, willing herself to keep the tears at bay, gripping the keychain even tighter. But the cracks were beginning to show. Shoto stepped forward, now standing directly in front of her desk. His mismatched eyes fixed on her, piercing through her fragile facade. He asked again where YN was, his tone firmer this time. It had been a while since she had attended class, and as her best friend, Haruko should know. That was all it took. Haruko broke down, sobbing into her hands. Her body shook as the tears finally spilled over, and the classroom, once filled with noise and laughter, fell silent. Everyone froze, staring in disbelief. Haruko, known for her fiery, strong-headed personality, was crumbling before them, something none of them had ever imagined seeing. She wiped her tears furiously with her sleeve, slamming her fists down on the desk in frustration. She shouted that she didn't know where YN was, her voice cracking with emotion. She wanted to be left alone, insisting that all she wanted was YN, expressing her disdain for everyone else. With that, she bolted from the room, her sobs echoing in the silent classroom. The other students exchanged confused and awkward glances, unsure of what to say or do. One girl, breaking the uneasy silence, muttered about what had just happened. Slowly, the class regained its usual liveliness, the buzz of conversations resuming, though now tinged with curiosity. But Shoto remained frozen in place, standing in front of Haruko's desk, his mind whirling. In his hand, he clutched a small container of cookies, ones that resembled the ones YN had baked for him once. Along with the cookies was a small letter he had planned to give her. He looked down at them, then over at YN's empty desk. The absence was more palpable than ever. With a quiet sigh, Shoto walked back to his own desk, slipping the letter and cookies back into his bag. He thought to himself that it was just another day. He didn't know what had just happened with Haruko, but the strange sadness he felt lingered as he stared at YN's empty seat, his mind troubled and confused. Shoto walked into his house, clutching the straps of his bag as his shoes clicked against the polished floor. The Todoroki household was large, its design sleek and cold, much like the man who ruled over it. The floors gleamed with a clinical shine, and the walls were a cool, stark white. Pictures were few and far between, leaving an almost hollow atmosphere throughout the home. It was a place meant for discipline, not warmth. Shoto, used to the cold environment, hardly noticed the chill anymore. As he crouched down by the entrance to remove his shoes, the smell of dinner wafted in from the kitchen, faintly comforting in the otherwise silent house. Fuyumi poked her head out from the kitchen door, her kind eyes lighting up as she spotted her brother. She welcomed him home, stepping out into the hallway. Fuyumi had a warm presence about her, a stark contrast to the cold home they lived in. Dressed casually, her long white hair fell over her shoulders, and her soft, pale blue eyes were filled with gentle kindness. She wiped her hands on her apron and smiled at him. Shoto, distracted and troubled by everything that had happened at school, didn't immediately respond. He was still thinking about why and not showing up for class that day. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. He stared down at his shoes as he pulled them off, not quite ready to meet Fuyumi's cheerful gaze. Noticing the shift in his mood, Fuyumi placed her hands on her hips and stood in front of him, still smiling but with a hint of concern. She lightly asked if he had given YN the apology cookies and the letter. Shoto's gaze lifted to meet hers, his usually stoic expression betraying a flicker of disappointment. He opened his palms, staring at the empty space where the cookies and letter had been tucked away in his bag. He admitted softly that she wasn't in that day. Fuyumi's expression softened as she affectionately ruffled Shoto's hair, encouraging him to look up at her. She reassured him that it was okay and that he could give them to her when she returned to. She would appreciate it. Shoto nodded silently, but the unease lingered. Fuyumi took his school bag from him, giving him a reassuring smile before he turned to walk toward his room. As he passed through the hallway, he noticed his father standing nearby, speaking on the phone. Endeavor's usual stern expression was even more serious than normal, his fiery beard slightly more grown out. It was rare to see his father distracted, but something about the conversation had taken precedence over everything else. Shoto paused in the hallway, curiosity piqued as he listened in, his father's gruff voice carrying through the quiet house. Endeavor noticed him out of the corner of his eye but didn't acknowledge him until he ended the call, the atmosphere tense. He told Shoto that there would be no training that day, his voice firm but lacking its usual edge. Shoto blinked in surprise. His father never allowed him to skip training. Whatever Endeavor had been discussing must have been serious, and Shoto wanted to know why. He asked directly. Endeavor huffed, his eyes narrowing slightly as he crossed his arms. He explained that President Nizu had called. Apparently, a student from Shoto's class had been taken a few days ago, and Nizu was asking for his help. His voice was gruff, almost dismissive, but there was a hint of focus in his eyes as he continued. It was not a bad deal. If he did this favor for Nizu, he promised to get Shoto into UA on recommendation. He mentioned he would be out that night. Shoto's heart sank as his father's words hit him like a ton of bricks. He could barely process what was being said. YN had been taken. The words echoed in his mind, each repetition hitting him harder than the last. He felt sick. His chest tightened painfully, and it felt like something sharp was piercing his heart over and over. She was gone, and he hadn't even had the chance to apologize. Before he knew it, his body was moving on its own. He ran to his room, his breath quickening with each step. As soon as he reached the door, he slammed it shut behind him, sliding down against it until he was sitting on the floor. His knees pulled up to his chest as he tried to control his breathing, but the panic wouldn't stop. First it was his mother, now YN. The thought crashed through his mind like a tidal wave, overwhelming him. He clutched his scar with one trembling hand, the painful reminder of all the things he had lost and the things he feared he would never get back. His breathing began to slow, but the ache in his chest remained. Though Shoto harbored deep resentment toward his father, he recognized Endeavor's strength and capability. He had to believe in his abilities as a hero. He thought desperately about whether his father would bring her back, staring at the ceiling as if the answer would come from the stars. Yet, even as he tried to have faith, a part of him felt hollow. He couldn't endure this again. Not after losing his mother. Not after feeling powerless all his life. He thought with urgency that YN had to come back. The room that Yu and Chisaki entered was cold and sterile, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast stark shadows on the concrete floor. The dull gray walls were rough and uninviting. Metal tables and medical equipment lined one side, while the opposite wall held various monitors and instruments, their purposes unclear but undeniably ominous. The air felt thick with a sharp, medicinal scent, like a place where things went wrong. You stumbled in, heart racing with every fearful step. Your eyes darted around the room, taking in the clinical environment. There was something eerily familiar about the space, but you couldn't place it. The familiarity only added to the growing unease that made your stomach churn. A sudden, sharp pain shot through your head, making you freeze in place. Your hands flew up to your temples, fingers digging into your scalp as you tried to calm the throbbing ache. The room began to blur, the lights too bright, the air too thick. Chisaki stepped forward, his expression as cold and detached as ever. Without a word, he grabbed the back of your shirt and yanked you forward with little effort. You fell hard onto the cold floor, your palms scraping against the rough concrete as your body hit the ground. The shock made your breath hitch, and you could feel the sting of tears welling up in your eyes. Your body trembled, both from the pain and the overwhelming fear flooding your senses. You asked him why he was doing this to you, your voice shaking. You didn't know what else to say, your mind a whirl of confusion, pain, and desperation. All you could do was look up at Chisaki, hoping for some kind of answer that would make sense of the terror you felt deep inside. But his expression remained unreadable, his cold eyes locking onto yours without an ounce of empathy. He spoke, his gaze devoid of any emotion. He told you not to flatter yourself, stating that he had several subjects before you and that you were not special. His words cut deep, and you could feel the weight of his indifference pressing down on you. He added that all his other subjects knew how to comply, which was a skill you seemed to have forgotten. Before you could react, Chisaki's hand shot forward, his nails digging into your cheeks with cruel precision. A sharp pain shot through your face as his fingers tightened, leaving angry red marks on your skin. Tears welled up in your eyes, the sting of his grip making it impossible to hold back your sobs. He hissed that you would be quiet and compliant, explaining that this experimentation was for the betterment of society, suggesting you should feel honored to play a leading role in removing what he called the disgusting mutations known as quirks. His words echoed in your mind, the cruelty behind them sending a shiver down your spine. You felt your heart race, fear and despair crashing over you like waves. The tears in your eyes blurred your vision as you held your breath, helpless and terrified, unsure of what would happen next. You let out a scream as your insides twisted and contorted in ways that felt impossible. It felt like fire was burning through your veins, your body racked with unrelenting pain that left you gasping for air. Instinctively, you dug your nails into your thigh, feeling the skin break beneath your grip. But the sharp sting was nothing compared to the torment coursing through your entire being. Your muscles tensed violently, every nerve in your body screaming in protest. Your vision swam, blurred with the intensity of the pain, and you coughed, tasting copper as blood splattered onto the cold floor beneath you. Your throat burned from the screams, but you couldn't stop. Your body was no longer your own, shaking uncontrollably as you endured wave after wave of agony. Through the haze of suffering, your gaze fell on Chisaki, standing before you, his expression blank and utterly unaffected by your pain. His hand was outstretched, fingers subtly twitching, controlling the chaos within you as if it were a routine task. He watched you writhe, his eyes cold and detached. Your cries of pain didn't faze him. To him, you were just another experiment. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, the unbearable torture began to subside. The pressure in your chest lessened, and you could feel your insides slowly, painfully, knitting themselves back together. Your lungs burned as you took a shaky breath, your muscles weak and trembling from the ordeal. The pain still lingered, but it was duller now, more like a heavy weight pressing against you rather than the fiery, ripping agony from moments before. You exhaled, your body finally collapsing, spent from the ordeal. Every inch of you ached, your skin slick with sweat, but at least you could breathe again. You lay there, completely drained, your limbs limp and useless as you tried to regain some sense of control over your body. Chisaki remained unbothered, taking out his notepad and jotting down observations, his expression thoughtful but dispassionate. His gaze flickered over you briefly as he muttered to himself, wondering how effective it would be if he were to force you to use your quirk. Your mind, clouded with exhaustion and pain, latched onto that word quirk. The thought echoed in your mind as consciousness began to slip away. You didn't understand what he was talking about, you were quirkless. Your eyes fluttered shut as your mind drifted further into unconsciousness. Then, suddenly, your head slipped completely, and with a dull thud, it collided with the hard floor. The sharp impact sent a brief jolt through your already fragile body, but the pain barely registered. It was nothing compared to the torment you had just endured. The cold concrete pressed against YN's skin, but she barely felt it as her mind slipped into the comforting oblivion of unconsciousness. The world around her faded, consumed by a black void, her last thought dissolving into emptiness. Finally, everything went silent. Several heroes gathered in the small, dimly lit meeting room of the police station, all waiting for a lead in YN's disappearance. The air was thick with tension. At the center of the room, Officer Sato stood by a projector, files strewn across the table in front of him. Sato cleared his throat, addressing the room. He informed them that the house in front of the park had recently installed security cameras, which captured footage around the time YN was taken. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in before continuing. From the figure alone, they had managed to deduce the identity, or at least the group, the kidnapper worked for. Aizawa leaned forward, his expression serious, resting his head on his palm. He asked for the identity of the group. Just then, the door to the meeting room creaked open, and Police Chief Officer Kenji entered, commanding immediate attention. Kenji was a tall man with a broad, muscular frame. His deep-set brown eyes were sharp and analytical, reflecting years of stress and experience. His police uniform was impeccably pressed, with his badge shining on his chest. Kenji announced that it was the Yakuza. The room fell silent. Even Endeavor, who had been standing in the corner with his arms crossed, leaned forward in surprise, his eyes widening in confusion. Endeavor questioned what the Yakuza would want with someone like YN. Officer Kenji moved to the front of the room, taking over the presentation. He explained that they had reason to believe YN's past was deeply intertwined with the Yakuza. It was more complicated than a random kidnapping. They wouldn't have taken her unless she held some significance to them. Namuri crossed her arms, frowning as she suggested that most Yakuza families had public addresses and questioned why they couldn't just storm in and arrest them to retrieve YN. Before Kenji could respond, Officer Sato interjected, explaining that the Yakuza thrived because the Hero Commission and the police force left them alone. It was a delicate balance. They controlled the entire red light district and kept low-level criminals in check. Disrupting that balance could risk an all-out war in the underworld. Present Mike, visibly frustrated, balled his hands into fists, expressing his anger at the thought of letting the Yakuza keep YN. Officer Kenji raised a hand to calm the growing tension, assuring them that they were not saying they would allow it. However, charging in headfirst would not help either. They needed to be strategic. The room grew quiet again as the reality of the situation sank in. YN's kidnapping was not just a random act of violence, it was tied to something larger and more dangerous. The heroes understood that rushing into the lion's den could endanger YN's life or worsen the situation. Aizawa glanced at the others, his expression unreadable, but concern lingered in his eyes. He asked what the plan was. Officer Kenji took a deep breath, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. He explained that they needed to gather more intelligence on the specific faction of the Yakuza involved, discover their base of operations, leadership, and any potential weaknesses. This was not merely a rescue mission, it was an infiltration. The heroes listened intently as the officers began to devise a plan, their minds racing with possibilities and risks. The stakes were high, and time was running out. YN's life depended on every move they made from that moment onward. YN jolted awake, her mind still tangled in the remnants of a dark dream. She sat up, gasping for breath, her heart racing as if she had just escaped something dreadful. Pressing her hand to her chest, she tried to calm her pulse while taking in her surroundings. The room was traditional Japanese in style, with tatami mats covering the floor and sliding shoji doors casting a soft glow from outside. A low wooden table sat at the center of the room, and a small vase of flowers rested on a lacquered cabinet in the corner. The room felt eerily familiar, stirring a sense of unease deep inside her. Fumi's voice echoed down the hall, frustration evident as she called out to Taki and Kohei, who were late for their shift again. They strolled over to their station with an unbothered slouch, seemingly indifferent to the time. Taki yawned, scratching his head lazily, while Kohei smirked, dismissing Fumi's irritation. Fumi's eyebrow twitched as she pointed out they were not just 2 minutes late but an hour. Taki, unfazed, joked that Kohei wouldn't get off him, prompting Kohei to laugh loudly and slap Taki on the back, making a comment about Taki's physique. Tsubasa, the ever-deadpan observer, chimed in, pointing out that Taki lacked any muscle. Taki huffed, crossing his arms and glaring at Tsubasa, who he accused of being out of shape. As they walked away, Fumi couldn't resist getting the last word, teasing them about not wanting to be near their antics. Kohei shouted back, boasting about his ability to attract more attention than Fumi, who opened her mouth to retort but decided against it, muttering under her breath as the two guards continued on their way, laughing carelessly. YN stood in her room, pressing her ear against the door, trying to make sense of the bizarre conversation happening outside. Confusion twisted her face as she listened to the muffled shouting and banter between the guards. The absurdity of their conversation made her head spin for a moment, almost distracting her from the seriousness of her situation. She leaned back, staring blankly at the door, unsure whether to laugh or cry at the ridiculousness. Shaking her head, she refocused. There was no time to be confused by their banter. You had more important things to worry about, like finding a way out of this place. Ideas for escape filled your mind as you searched the room for anything that could help. You opened the window and looked down, but jumping from that height seemed too risky. Drawers were pulled open, vents were unscrewed, and ultimately, you decided that the door was probably your best option. Sitting on the cold floor, you gripped 2 thin metal sticks tightly in your hands, struggling with the lock for what felt like an eternity. Your fingers ached, and your knuckles scraped as you twisted and turned the makeshift tools without success. Each faint click or movement in the lock sparked a glimmer of hope, only to be dashed moments later when the door remained firmly shut. Sweat dripped down your forehead, mixing with the dust on the floor as you lay sprawled out, trying different angles and positions to get the door to budge. Minutes turned into a half-hour, and your frustration only grew. You gritted your teeth, feeling more desperate with each passing second. Tears welled up in your eyes as the stress of the situation weighed heavily on you. In a moment of fury, you slammed the sticks down and pulled at your hair, overwhelmed by your helplessness. With a shaky breath, you forced yourself to try one more time, wiping away the tears that threatened to fall. When the lock didn't give way again, a sob escaped your throat. Your hands trembled as you gripped the door handle in defeat, slamming it down in frustration. But then the door creaked. You froze, blinking in disbelief as the door slowly swung open on its own. Your heart pounded in your chest, and for a moment, you just stared at the gap, struggling to process what had just happened. The realization hit you hard: the door had been open the whole time. In an unexpected burst, you laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh, but a broken, disbelieving one, tinged with frustration and absurdity. You clutched your face with your hands, shaking as you fell to the ground. Tears of disbelief streamed down your cheeks, mingling with your laughter. You couldn't decide whether to laugh harder or cry, so you did both, overwhelmed by the ridiculousness of the situation. All that time, all that effort, and the door had been open from the start. What a joke! You stepped cautiously into the dimly lit hallway, your heart racing. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered occasionally, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The floor felt cold and hard beneath your feet, each step echoing in the stillness of the corridor. The air was thick with tension, and every instinct urged you to remain alert. You scanned your surroundings, eyes darting from one end of the hallway to the other. The walls were painted a dull gray, adorned with sporadic posters and security notices that seemed to hang limply, as if they, too, were weary of this place. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in, and you could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on you. Suddenly, the muffled sounds of familiar voices drifted toward you, pulling you forward. Taki and Kohei were arguing again. Your heart raced at the realization if they were here, they must be guarding the exit. You strained to hear their conversation, inching closer as their words became clearer. Taki boasted about his strength, claiming he could easily handle both Tsubasa and Fumi. You suppressed a laugh, but your nerves kept you on edge. As their voices grew louder, you heard their footsteps shifting, drawing closer. Panic gripped you, and you quickly scanned for an open door, desperately jiggling handles until you found one that gave way. With a rush of adrenaline, you slipped inside and closed the door behind you, heart racing. The room was small, a cramped closet barely big enough to hold a few coats and storage boxes. The scent of dust filled the air, mixing with the faint, musty odor of forgotten belongings. Clothes hung limply from a rack, and you instinctively pushed them aside to make more space for yourself. Your breathing slowed as you pressed your back against the door, the wood cool against your skin. The shadows of footsteps glided beneath the crack at the bottom of the door, and you held your breath, every nerve in your body on high alert. Kohei's voice rose in annoyance, questioning why Taki was talking about others in front of him. Taki retorted, teasing yet defiant, and their bickering continued, mixing amusement with frustration. You had never felt so close to freedom, yet here you were, hiding from two guards who seemed more interested in their squabble than their duty. The shadows beneath the door began to shift, and you leaned forward slightly, peering through the crack. The muffled sounds of their argument grew louder, their bodies moving in and out of view, shadows dancing with animated gestures. He challenged Kohei, claiming he could take him with one hand tied behind his back, and laughter broke through the seriousness of their spat. Just then, a loud thud echoed as one of them stumbled, followed by a burst of laughter. The shadows beneath the door shifted violently as their playful brawl escalated, fists flying as they grappled with each other. You could almost hear the impact as Taki delivered a light punch to Kohei's shoulder, who retaliated with a swift shove that sent Taki stumbling back. Their playful banter continued, and you stifled a nervous laugh, incredulous at how absurd they sounded. You couldn't believe these were the guards keeping you prisoner. Their bickering made them seem less like captors and more like siblings squabbling. Suddenly, a loud clatter made your body freeze, your heart skipping a beat. It sounded like something had been knocked over. Curiosity prickled at you, and you quickly lowered yourself to the floor, peeking through the thin gap at the base of the door. Your eyes widened. A ring of keys lay on the floor, just out of your reach. For a long moment, you simply stared at them, your mind racing. Was this a trap? Had they dropped them on purpose? You quickly dismissed the thought their conversation was still going, far too distracted for this to be intentional. You feel genuinely lucky. Acting quickly but quietly, you grab the two metal sticks you found earlier while scavenging the room. Carefully, you slide one of them under the door, using it like a hook to drag the keys closer. However, it isn't as easy as you hoped. The keys slip out of your makeshift tool's grip several times, scraping the floor with each failed attempt. Each clink of metal against the floor makes you wince, fearing the guards will hear. Your fingers tremble as you try again and again to snag the keys, your frustration growing. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, you manage to pull the keyring close enough to grab with your fingers. You nearly gasp in relief, clutching them tightly in your hand. Your pulse races as you stare at the ring of keys, your mind spinning with possibilities. Could this be it? Could you finally get out? You try to remain calm, but your anxiety grows. You can't afford to be caught standing here with the guard's keys in your hand. Taki needs to get that looked at, Kohei remarks, his footsteps heavy as he passes by. Taki groans, his voice fading as they move away. You still, waiting for the sound of their voices to completely disappear down the hallway. The coast is clear for now, but you know they will return soon. After several agonizing minutes, you decide the coast is clear. You slowly pull the handle down, the door creaking open ever so slightly. With a mixture of excitement and anxiety, you peek through the crack, scanning the empty hallway. You have no idea how long this window of opportunity will last, but you aren't going to waste it. Slowly, you push the door open and step out into the dimly lit corridor. YN sat quietly on the edge of the hospital bed, her legs dangling off the side as the nurse finished wrapping the bandage around her right arm. The sterile scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, mixing with the faint, rhythmic beeping of medical machines from nearby rooms. The hospital room itself was small but clean, with white walls, a standard bed, and a small window letting in a sliver of evening sunlight. Aizawa stood across the room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching the scene unfold in his usual calm, quiet manner. He glanced toward the door every now and then, likely waiting for Yamada to return from his search for a vending machine. The nurse, a kind woman with short brown hair tucked neatly under a cap, finished the bandaging with a smile. She secured the end with a small sticker that had a cute, pastel Pikachu winking on it. She praised YN for her bravery, assuring her that she would heal in no time. Afterward, she turned to Aizawa, requesting to speak with him outside for a moment. Aizawa nodded and exited the room with her, leaving YN to sit on the bed, absent-mindedly kicking her legs as she waited. Moments later, a frantic voice echoed through the hallway, calling out for YN. Her eyes snapped toward the door, confusion bubbling up inside her as she quickly hopped off the bed. Just as she was about to move toward the hallway, Haruko burst through the door, panting heavily as if she had run the entire way there. Her usual confident demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Instead, her face was flushed, her eyes puffy and swollen from crying, tears still streaming down her cheeks as she frantically searched the room. As soon as she laid eyes on YN, she rushed toward her and clutched onto her with all her strength. Her tears soaked YN's shoulder as she shook with heavy, hiccuping breaths. YN felt her own eyes brimming with tears as she wrapped her arms around Haruko, squeezing her tightly. In the midst of their emotional reunion, a stern voice cut through the moment, scolding Haruko for running in a hospital. A tall, elegant woman entered the room. She had long, straight black hair that framed her sharp features, her eyes slightly narrowed as she gave her daughter a disapproving look. Dressed in a neat, business-casual outfit, Haruko's mother had an air of authority around her, though the concern in her eyes was clear as she glanced at YN and her daughter hugging each other. The woman hurried over, kneeling in front of YN as she looked up, still wiping the tears from her eyes. Nervous under her gaze, YN felt the tension dissolve as her face crumpled, and she too began to cry. Everyone in the room was crying now. Even Haruko's usual tough exterior seemed to melt away in the embrace of the moment. Haruko's mother stammered through her sobs, introducing herself and thanking YN for being a friend to her daughter. She expressed her joy at Haruko finally making a friend, sharing how Haruko would come home every day excited to tell her about their time together. However, her tone shifted as she spoke of the recent kidnapping, revealing how devastated Haruko had been without YN. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pulled both YN and Haruko into a warm, tight embrace, expressing her gratitude and affection. The hug was overwhelming but in the best way. YN could feel Haruko's trembling ease as she wiped her tears, and the warmth of the hug sank into her skin, spreading through her like a comforting blanket. Just as the emotional moment peaked, a voice cut through the room, breaking the solemn atmosphere. Bakugo stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, scowling as if the whole display was an inconvenience to him. His crimson eyes rolled dramatically as he leaned against the doorframe, clearly irritated. The tension in the room popped like a bubble, and despite everything, YN couldn't help but let out a soft, watery laugh. Haruko wiped away her tears, glaring fiercely at Bakugo, while her mother looked on, bewildered but still smiling gently. Haruko's glare intensified as she stepped closer to Bakugo, hands firmly planted on her hips. She demanded to know who he thought he was, telling her what to do, calling him an extra and insisting he leave. Bakugo, unfazed by her defiance, retorted with a scoff, questioning her choice of words and asserting that he had no intention of leaving. He strolled further into the room with his trademark confidence, hands stuffed in his pockets, staring her down. Haruko's fists clenched as she confronted him, their faces nearly touching. She barked at him to go away, her voice filled with determination. Just as the tension threatened to escalate, Haruko's mother intervened with a soft, almost awkward smile, suggesting that they all seemed a bit cranky. She offered to fetch some snacks from the vending machine, hoping to lighten the mood. With a warm smile, she reassured them that she would be back soon. Once she left, Bakugo cracked his knuckles, glaring down at Haruko. He pointed out her nerve for confronting him after crying, while Haruko stood her ground, crossing her arms defiantly and demanding he leave. Bakugo shot her a fierce glare, expressing his irritation at being there against his will. Haruko questioned his identity, and Bakugo, with a cocky smirk, introduced himself as Bakugo Katsuki, the future #1 hero, insisting she remember his name. Haruko dismissed him, rolling her eyes and suggesting that someone like him could never be famous. Bakugo's expression darkened as he challenged her, vowing to take her on despite her being a girl. Unfazed, Haruko accepted his challenge, standing tall and ready for a fight. As the tension peaked, Mitsuki Bakugo stormed into the room, effortlessly lifting her son by the back of his shirt. Bakugo squirmed in her grip, embarrassment flooding his face as Haruko burst into laughter, mocking him. Mitsuki scolded Bakugo, insisting he behave, while Haruko doubled over in laughter at the sight of him being manhandled. You stood by, trying to stifle your own laughter at the amusing scene. Once released, Bakugo grumbled as he rubbed the back of his head, while Mitsuki rushed over to you, enveloping you in a warm hug. Her embrace was firm yet gentle, making you feel safe. After a moment, she pulled back, her hands resting on your shoulders as she scanned your face with concern, inspecting you for any injuries. Mitsuki's sharp eyes quickly darted to the bandages on your arms and legs, and though she tried to hide her sadness, it flickered in her gaze. After a moment of silent concern, she masked her emotions, putting on a brave face as she nudged Bakugo forward, announcing that he had a gift for you. Surprised, you glanced at Bakugo, who was looking away, clearly uncomfortable but not denying his mother's words. Midoriya sat at the dining table, his eyes scanning the room filled with All Might-themed birthday decorations. His mother had gone all-out, streamers hung from the ceiling, balloons floated in the corners, and a large cardboard cutout of All Might stood proudly by the door, giving his signature thumbs up. The table was adorned with All Might plates, napkins, and cups, and a small action figure of the hero held a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Izuku." The birthday cake was shaped like All Might, complete with a bright yellow smile and a dramatic pose. But none of it mattered to Midoriya. His gaze lingered on the cake, his heart heavy and disinterested. The vibrant decorations, which would normally fill him with excitement, only served as a reminder of his failure. How could he celebrate with All Might as the theme when he couldn't even save the one person who meant the most to him? Heroes were supposed to protect the ones they love. That was the foundation of everything he believed in. Yet he couldn't protect you, his only friend, his girlfriend. He felt like a fraud, a terrible boyfriend, unworthy of the hero name. He missed you more than words could express. Inko watched her son closely, her heart aching for him. She had spent hours decorating the house to cheer him up, hoping to see the familiar spark of joy in his eyes. But instead, he just looked defeated. With a soft smile, she moved behind him and began to switch off the lights, the warm glow of the candles becoming the room's only source of light. She carefully lit the candles on the cake, her hand running gently through his green curls. She encouraged him to make a wish, her voice soothing as she stood beside him. Midoriya looked at the flickering candles, their small flames dancing in the dim light. He nodded reluctantly, his heart torn. He only had one true wish: to meet All Might. Oh wait, there were two. To meet All Might and to see you again. He couldn't bear another day without you. With a deep breath, he leaned forward and blew out the candles, his eyes closing as he made his wish, his mind filled with thoughts of you. Inko watched him closely, her smile softening as she saw the hopeful look on his face. As he kept his eyes closed, she smirked knowingly. Just then the doorbell rang, cutting through the quiet room. Midoriya's eyes snapped open, his heart racing. Could it be? His mind whirled, filled with hope and disbelief. He stared at the door, not blinking, his pulse quickening as he thought to himself, did my birthday wish come true? He couldn't afford to miss this moment, not for a second. As Inko slowly walked toward the door, Izuku sat frozen at the table, his mind racing. Who could that be? He wondered, confusion clouding his thoughts. No one ever came to his birthday parties before. It was always just him and his mom, quiet, NTMT, and devoid of guests. Was it one of the neighbors? He frowned, doubting that anyone from around the neighborhood would drop by uninvited. Another possibility flashed through Izuku's mind. Kaken? Could it be him? They had grown up together, after all, and even though their relationship had always been rocky, Katsuki had softened a little toward him recently. Maybe this was Kaken's way of making up for things? But as soon as the thought entered his mind, Izuku quickly shook his head. No way. Bakugo wouldn't show up to his birthday. It wasn't his style. Not even a little. Kaken barely tolerated him most of the time, let alone cared enough to come to a party. He could already imagine the explosion of insults if Bakugo had somehow gotten wind of the birthday celebration. Izuku frowned, dismissing the idea as fast as it had come. No, it couldn't be Kaken. The sound of the doorbell echoed again. Midoriya stood frozen, unable to move, too afraid to even breathe. Was this the moment he had been waiting for? Could it be his wish came true? Inko finally stood by the door, her hands resting on the knob as she opened it, painfully slow. The sunlight from outside poured into the dim room, momentarily blinding Midoriya. He squinted, his heart pounding as he tried to make out the figure standing at the threshold. All he could see was a vague silhouette, the bright light obscuring the details. He muttered under his breath, wondering if it could be All Might. His heart swelled with hope, but as he blinked a few more times, adjusting to the light, his expectations crashed. Standing there was not the towering figure of All Might but a scruffy, disheveled man with long, unkempt hair and tired eyes. Aizawa, hands shoved deep into his pockets, stood at the door looking as if he didn't even want to be there. His gaze lazily scanned the surroundings, as if he had more important places to be. Midoriya froze, his faith in birthday wishes shattering right then and there. Who was this man? His mind scrambled to connect the dots, and then it hit him. Isn't that YN's dad? He blinked in disbelief. What was he doing here? Before he could fully process what was happening, a small figure popped out from behind Aizawa. Izuku's eyes widened in shock, his heart skipping a beat as he recognized your voice. His vision blurred with tears as he stumbled, nearly falling out of his chair in his haste to reach you. He scrambled back to his feet and ran to you, enveloping you in a tight, desperate hug. His arms wrapped around you as if afraid you might disappear again. His sobs came out uncontrollably, his face buried in your shoulder. He was overwhelmed with relief and emotion, his tears soaking into your shirt as he held you even tighter, never wanting to let go. Izuku clung to you tightly, as if letting go might mean you'd disappear again. You were finally back. His heart raced with joy, all the anxiety he had carried in your absence melting away. His plan, the one he had envisioned for their future together, could finally continue. He wiped his tears with the back of his hand, giving you a messy but genuine smile. You smiled back, holding the edges of your skirt in excitement. You were dressed in a light pastel sundress with small floral patterns. The dress fluttered slightly around your knees, and a delicate ribbon was tied at your waist. Izuku couldn't help but marvel at how amazing you looked now that you were back to where he needed you next to him. As the birthday progressed, Izuku pulled you to the cake, wanting to share the first slice with you. Inko was snapping photos excitedly, her smile wide as she captured every precious moment. Aizawa stood off to the side with Yamada, who was practically squealing over the sheer cuteness of the pair. Well, mostly your cuteness, as he made sure to point out. Once the cake was cut, Izuku and you sat together, both happily munching on your slices. The cake was soft and sweet, the buttercream light and fluffy, melting on your tongues with each bite. Meanwhile, Aizawa, Yamada, and Inko were chatting in the living room, sipping drinks and occasionally glancing at the two of you with fond smiles. As you continued to eat, you looked up, noticing a small smudge of buttercream on Izuku's cheek. You giggled softly, getting his attention. Playfully you told him to hold still. Before he could react, you leaned in, your thumb brushing gently against his cheek as you wiped the cream away. Izuku's eyes went wide, his entire face turning beet red. He felt like his heart had just exploded in his chest. A girl touched his face. His mind raced, his body frozen in place as you pulled back and casually liked the buttercream off your thumb. That small gesture, innocent and sweet, was enough to send Izuku into full-blown panic mode. His face burned, the blush creeping all the way to his ears as he stammered incoherently, waving his hands in front of him as if that might cool him down. His words tumbled over each other, a tangled mess of flustered confusion. His brain had completely short-circuited, and the more he thought about it, the worse his blushing got. He was so embarrassed that he could barely look at her, his eyes darting everywhere but her face. YN giggled at his reaction, amused by how much a little buttercream could fluster him. Meanwhile, Izuku felt like he was about to melt right then and there. He turned his gaze to YN, admiring her laughing face, but quickly snapped himself out of his thoughts, somehow turning even more red. Izuku shoved another massive piece of cake into his mouth, cheeks puffed out like a squirrel, trying hard to distract himself from the embarrassment of his earlier thoughts. He kept sneaking glances at YN, but of course, she noticed. She turned to him with wide, curious eyes, leaning in as she poked his forehead. She asked what he was thinking so hard about, her face scrunched up in concentration. The sudden poke made him blush even harder, and he quickly looked away. He insisted that it was nothing, trying to hide behind his cake. But YN wasn't letting it go. She tilted her head, eyes sparkling with interest, and kept shaking him gently by the sleeve of his shirt, urging him to share his thoughts. He put his fork down, staring into his cake, trying to calm his nerves and avoid spilling his inner thoughts. He thought about his wish, hoping more than anything that he would get to spend more time with YN. He didn't know why, but being with her always made him feel so happy, like nothing else really mattered. She was the only one who stood up for him and became his friend even when she knew he was quirkless. That's why he needed her. It was a simple wish, but to him, it meant the world. YN and Midoriya rushed around, helping Inko finish fixing up the room. Eventually, it was set up for the ultimate movie night. Yu and Izuku were stretched out on the floor, heads almost touching, staring up at the TV. The only light came from the screen, giving everything a soft glow. Inko moved around, handing out giant bowls of popcorn to everyone, making sure nobody went without snacks. Inko asked YN if she wanted sweet and salty or buttered popcorn, and YN replied quickly, practically bouncing at the idea of snacks. She watched as Inko passed the rest of the bowls to Yamada and Aizawa, who were slouched on the couch. Next to YN, Izuku was fidgeting, probably trying not to seem too awkward. They were lying so close that their arms almost brushed against each other, and every time she caught him looking at her, he would whip his head back toward the screen, cheeks blazing. She held back a laugh, finding it cute how flustered he got over the smallest things. Izuku had already jumped up earlier to turn off the lights, and now the room was nearly pitch black, except for the flickering light of the TV. Trailers started rolling, but nobody was really paying attention yet. Everyone was too busy munching on popcorn or, in Izuku's case, trying not to completely lose it lying next to YN. Inko asked what they wanted to watch, tossing the remote to Yamada. Yamada snatched it like it was a competition and suggested Harry Potter, but Aizawa groaned, unimpressed, saying they had watched it too many times. Yamada, however, hit play anyway, and the Harry Potter theme music blasted through the room. Inko giggled at their playful bickering, and soon everyone's attention was pulled to the screen as the movie started. As the movie played, YN felt her eyelids growing heavy. She and Izuku had somehow ended up sleeping practically intertwined, arms and legs tangled up as if neither of them had any personal space. Her head rested on Izuku's shoulder while one of his arms draped over her waist. Aizawa frowned, his expression serious as he noted how close Izuku was to Yamada laughed, throwing his arm around Aizawa's shoulders, but Aizawa remained serious, insisting he didn't like it. Inko walked over, her eyes softening as she stared down at the two of them. She knelt carefully, trying to untangle the mess of limbs. First, she gently lifted Izuku's arm from YN's waist, moving it so it rested by his side. Then she freed YN's legs from his, shifting her slightly so she was lying on her own. It took a few soft nudges and adjustments before they were finally separated. Once untangled, Inko bent down and scooped Izuku up in her arms, his head resting against her shoulder. Aizawa moved over and carefully picked YN up, cradling her gently against his chest. His grip was firm yet gentle, as if he were holding something incredibly delicate. Inko turned to Aizawa and Yamada, a warm, grateful smile lighting up her face. She expressed her appreciation for their support, noting that it was the first time in a while she had seen Izuku act like his old self. Aizawa's gaze softened at her words, and he gave her a small nod. Yamada beamed, his smile wide and infectious, assuring her that it was no trouble at all. After exchanging goodbyes, they stepped outside into the crisp, cold night air. Aizawa opened his jacket slightly and tucked you inside, securing you snugly against his chest. The warmth of his body enveloped you, the fabric of his jacket wrapping around you like a comforting blanket. He held you firmly, shielding you from the evening chill. Yamada stretched his arms above his head, letting out a sigh as his breath formed a mist in the cold air. Aizawa glanced up at the sky and declared it was time to head home, his grip on you steady as he walked into the night with you nestled safely in his arms. Mitsuki rushed around the house, cleaning every surface in sight. Every few minutes, she dashed back into the kitchen to check on the numerous snacks and plates of food she was preparing. The entire house smelled incredible, but Katsuki found the whole situation annoying. Mitsuki called up the stairs, hands firmly planted on her hips, reminding him to be ready or she would come up and dress him herself. Upstairs, Katsuki sat on his bed, scowling. He was already in a foul mood from being woken up early for some event he knew nothing about. He struggled with the buttons on his shirt, finally managing to fasten it, but his irritation grew when his mom barged into his room without knocking. Mitsuki scanned the room and exclaimed about the mess, demanding he clean it up for their important guests. Katsuki looked around, thinking his room wasn't that messy, just a few toys and some clothes on the floor. He crossed his arms defiantly, questioning why he should clean for someone he considered an extra. Mitsuki's eyes narrowed, insisting it was important and that he shouldn't talk back. Katsuki groaned, rolling his eyes and muttering under his breath about who was coming over. Mitsuki threw her hands in the air, clearly losing patience, and insisted that their guest was a good friend he would want to have. Katsuki huffed, doing the bare minimum to tidy up, shoving toys under his bed and kicking clothes into his closet. He didn't care who was coming over, they were just extras ruining his day. As he stomped down the stairs, still grumbling, he watched his mom zip around the house, cleaning and rearranging. Then, the delicious smell from the kitchen caught his attention. His stomach growled as he wandered over to the stove, where countless pots and pans were spread out. One pot in particular drew him in with its familiar spicy aroma, his favorite, spicy curry. Katsuki's mouth watered as he glanced around to ensure his mom wasn't watching. He spotted a stool and quickly dragged it over, climbing up to reach the ladle in the pot. Just as he grasped the ladle, his hand was smacked away. He spun around, glaring, rubbing his stinging hand and demanding to know what that was for. Mitsuki disapprovingly crossed her arms, reminding him that the food was for their guests and he could eat when they arrived. Katsuki rolled his eyes, incredulous that she would prioritize guests over her own son, and hopped off the stool with an exaggerated huff, questioning if the queen was coming over. Mitsuki shot him a warning look, ensuring he stayed away from the stove. Katsuki stomped off, still grumbling. The doorbell rang, and Mitsuki gasped dramatically, rushing to the door with a massive grin. Katsuki rolled his eyes at her excitement but felt his curiosity peak. He had to know who had caused all this fuss, even if he didn't care about meeting them. Stomping over to the door, he tried to peek around Mitsuki, who was blocking his view. Standing on his tiptoes, he craned his neck to catch a glimpse. Finally, after a few awkward moments, he got a clear look at the figure in the doorway. His entire body froze, fists clenched tightly as he narrowed his eyes. He had to admit that the guest had some nerve to disrupt things and then vanish. She needed to stick around long enough for him to show her he was the best, and he would make sure of that. YN returned Mitsuki's hug, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She greeted her warmly, and Mitsuki's heart melted as she held YN closer, whispering that Katsuki had been worried about her while she was gone. YN glanced at Katsuki, who stood with his arms crossed and a familiar scowl on his face, glaring at them. She couldn't help but doubt Mitsuki's words, but she smiled and nodded, pretending to believe it. Mitsuki turned her intense gaze to Katsuki, her voice sharp as she reminded him of their guest's importance. YN needed to finish prepping dinner, so Katsuki was asked to show her to his room. Katsuki's scowl deepened as he protested, questioning why he should do it. However, the fire in his mother's eyes dared him to refuse, prompting him to bite back his words. He crossed his arms with a huff and told YN to hurry up. Without waiting for a response, he turned and stomped up the stairs. YN clutched her small bag tightly and hurried after him, her eyes wandering curiously as they climbed to the second floor. The hallway was lined with trinkets and photos, some featuring younger versions of Katsuki, looking more innocent and carefree. She couldn't help but smile at the sight. Noticing her gaze, Katsuki raised an eyebrow and sarcastically asked if she was done stalking his family. YN quickly defended herself, her cheeks flushing red, while Katsuki smirked, clearly enjoying her flustered state. He teased her, calling her frog face, which prompted YN to march over to him as he stood in the doorway of his room. She retorted, calling him angry bird, and questioned if he needed to get his hearing checked, suggesting that his quirk had affected him. Katsuki's eyes blazed as he stomped closer, fists clenched, and declared that he would beat her up, threatening to send her back to whatever pond she crawled out of. YN, undeterred, countered that she would put him back in the bird's nest he fell out of, teasing him about how the fall must have messed with his head. She stepped even closer, flicking his forehead playfully, which only deepened his scowl. As the tension built, YN heard small crackles of explosions forming from Katsuki's hands, his glare sharp. Just then, soft steps approached from behind, and a calm voice cut through the moment, reminding them not to fight and that Katsuki couldn't use his quirk indoors, referencing a past incident. The crackling sound subsided, and YN turned to see the source of the voice. Masaru Bakugo had a kind face and a relaxed posture, his graying hair slightly messy yet neat. He wore a warm smile, a stark contrast to his son's fiery demeanor. YN quickly turned toward him and greeted him, bowing slightly. Masaru waved his hands nervously, insisting she didn't need to bow and could call him whatever she called his wife. The difference between Masaru and Katsuki was striking. While Katsuki was loud and brash, his father was gentle and humble, always trying to ease tension. YN smiled and nodded, calling him Uncle Masaru, which made him beam with pleasure. He guided them toward Katsuki's room, reminding them to avoid arguments and to get along. He promised to come get them when lunch was ready before heading back downstairs, leaving YN and Katsuki alone once again. YN sighed, realizing it was going to be a long day. Katsuki walked into his room, shoving his hands in his pockets, and plopped down by his desk, powering up his computer with a grunt. YN followed, curious, leaning over slightly to peer at the screen. She asked what he was doing and he huffed, surprisingly calm despite his usual brashness, telling her he was playing a game and to leave him alone. When the screen flashed red, he grumbled that he was playing Minecraft. Later, YN spotted her friends up ahead and called out to them, sprinting toward them with quick breaths as she caught up, hands on her knees. Haruko turned around, her face lighting up with a big smile, but then she pouted dramatically, teasing YN about using honorifics. Todoroki maintained his usual calm expression, though a slight furrow in his brows suggested he was bothered too. YN apologized, explaining she was trying out honorifics as they had learned in class. Todoroki corrected her, pointing out that it was actually Friday. Haruko waved off his comment, insisting YN didn't need to use honorifics with her but should with Todoroki, smirking as she emphasized his name. YN glanced at Todoroki, who seemed unfazed, but she noticed the slightest twitch at the corner of his mouth. She laughed at Haruko's playful personality and assured Todoroki that she wouldn't use honorifics if he didn't want her to. His face brightened as he nodded in agreement. Haruko, unable to resist the sudden shift in mood, playfully gagged and pulled YN along, urging her to hurry as her mom was waiting for them. As they approached the traffic stop, Haruko dramatically turned, hands on her hips, as if leading a mission. She reminded them of the safety rules they had learned, and they chanted together about looking both ways before crossing the street. Just as Haruko was about to continue her lesson, someone casually interrupted, announcing that the light was green. Haruko froze, glaring at the person who had dared to break her flow. Sensei Tanaka had chosen her to be the designated traffic leader, and now someone had just interrupted her important duty, putting them all in danger. The three turned their heads to look up at the figures staring down at them. By the traffic lights stood a tall boy, his presence dazzling. His messy blonde hair caught the sunlight, strands falling carelessly over his forehead, while large scarlet wings stretched out behind him, occasionally twitching as if they had a mind of their own. His posture was laid back, hands stuffed into his pockets, as his sharp golden eyes focused on the three of them, a small smirk tugging at his lips as he held in his laughter. Haruko huffed, rolling her eyes as she crossed her arms and snapped that she didn't care. The boy took a step closer, a teasing grin spreading across his face. He mockingly patted Haruko on the head, clearly enjoying how it made her seethe in anger. He pointed out that she could cross now and asked if she hadn't learned that the cars stop when the green man symbol lights up. Haruko's cheeks flushed, and she stomped her foot in frustration, insisting that she had learned. But he cut her off smoothly, questioning why she bothered singing that rhyme and waiting, declaring it pointless. Haruko's gaze sharpened, her eyes flickering to his wings before returning to his annoyingly handsome face. She challenged him, asking what the point of using the crosswalk was if he had wings. The boy folded his arms, his expression shifting to a more serious yet playful demeanor. He explained that he couldn't use his quirk out in public so openly, at least not until he got his hero license. Haruko was about to snap back, but Shoto beat her to it, calmly asking if he was a hero in training. Sensing Haruko's rising temper, Yu gently placed a hand on her shoulder. The gesture seemed to soothe her, and she refrained from any more biting remarks. At least for now. The boy nodded confidently, his grin etched onto his face as he pointed to his chest, declaring himself an up-and-coming hero and promising that in a few years, they would hear all about him. Haruko scoffed, muttering under her breath that they wouldn't. She turned to him again, asking for his name and teasingly calling him Bird Brain. You tried to stifle your laughter, but a cough escaped, while Haruko wheezed, clearly pleased with her own joke. The boy, however, didn't share the amusement. With a hand on his hip, he pointed a finger at them, correcting her that he was a hawk, one of the most intelligent species of birds, and then introduced himself as Hawks. Shoto, as stoic as ever, tilted his head slightly, commenting on how creative his parents must be. Haruko almost burst out laughing but managed to contain it, reminded that it was Shoto who had made the joke. She added that if Hawks was named that, then his parents didn't love him. For a moment, Hawks froze, the smile slipping from his face. His usual confidence seemed to waver, and you noticed the slight change, ready to step in, but before you could say anything, he quickly plastered on a forced grin. He remarked that they certainly had sharp tongues and that it had been nice talking, but this hawk had to take flight. Haruko nodded, waving him off, ready for him to leave. She remarked that as long as he didn't make a mess while flying away, it was fine. Yu and Shoto gasped, surprised at Haruko's casual use of a swear word, but Hawks seemed to regain his positivity, laughing genuinely this time. He declared that they had made his day and decided to repay them. 3 red feathers flew over to them and into their hands. The feathers were a deep, crimson red, with a glossy sheen that caught the light, making them appear almost metallic. They were soft to the touch yet firm, and when you ran your fingers down the spine, you could feel the subtle texture of the barbs. Despite their vibrant color, they felt delicate, as if they could flutter away at any moment. The edges had a slight curve, giving them a sense of motion even when still, as if they were always ready to take flight. You admired the feather for a moment, tracing its intricate details. But your awe was short-lived as you looked up to see the boy sprinting off. His running was odd, to say the least. Instead of a straight path, he darted in a zigzag pattern, almost like he was dodging invisible obstacles. His arms flailed slightly, wings twitching as if they wanted to spread out but were held back. Every few steps, he veered sharply to the left or right, making it look as though he was trying to evade something not that he could with those massive targets on his back. Haruko, Shoto, and you all watched with bewildered expressions. Haruko broke the silence, scrunching her nose and commenting on how he really didn't know how to run. Shoto, still watching the boy's chaotic movements, added that he wasn't surprised, reasoning that since he was a bird, he was probably used to flying everywhere. You chimed in, your lips curling into a disappointed pout, noting that he had said he was going to fly away, which had gotten your hopes up for nothing. You wondered why he was running in a zigzag pattern as if he were trying to avoid being shot at. Haruko let out a disgusted noise, quickly dropping the feather as if it were contaminated. She remarked that her mom had told her to be careful of people like him. Shoto mirrored her actions, letting the feather slip from his grasp. He noted that his dad had said random people who approached on the street were the worst type of humans. Haruko glanced over, raising an eyebrow and asking if his dad was a hero. The two of them continued their conversation, their voices growing fainter as your attention shifted back to the feather in your hand. You turned it over slowly, your eyes tracing its gentle curve. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at your lips. He was weird, but he didn't seem hostile. If anything, he was kind of funny. You carefully slid the feather into your pocket, feeling its soft edges brush against your fingers. Dusting off your skirt, you turned to your friends with a smile on your face, suggesting they head back since Haruko's mom had probably been waiting for ages. Haruko's mom stood tall, hands firmly planted on her hips as she gave the three kids a serious look. She instructed them to stick with her the whole time, emphasizing that it was dangerous out there. Her tone was soft but firm, leaving no room for argument. You and Shoto nodded obediently, both glancing around in anticipation. Meanwhile, Haruko gave her mom a look, half listening as she gazed at the massive theme park entrance ahead. Her mom called out to her, her voice sharp enough to pull her daughter's attention back. Haruko responded with a dramatic sigh, drawing out the word as she acknowledged her mother. Her mom softened, satisfied with everyone's agreement, and flashed them a warm smile. She led the way toward the park's towering gates, adorned with colorful lights and decorations that glimmered in the sunlight. Haruko's mom quickly broke off from the group to walk to the ticket booth, grabbing everyone's day passes. Haruko tightened her grip on your hand, her brow furrowing as she shot a sharp side glance at Shoto, who was completely oblivious, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the towering rides and vibrant colors of the theme park. She expressed her frustration, noting that she thought it was supposed to be just the two of you. You hushed her, leaning in slightly to whisper that you hadn't expected him to actually join you, thinking his dad would definitely say no. Haruko nodded, her expression softening a bit as she considered it. She wondered why his dad had changed his mind. Her voice trailed off as she watched Shoto gaze up at the dizzying heights of the roller coasters. His stoic demeanor remained, but there was a spark of excitement in his eyes that made him seem kinder. Your gaze lingered on Shoto for a moment longer. The faint spark of excitement in his usually guarded expression tugged at something in your chest, and guilt crept in uninvited. You quickly shook your head, trying to scatter the thought. Today was supposed to be fun for everyone. Determined, you forced a small smile and glanced over at Haruko, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Haruko's mom announced that they were all set, holding up a fan of shiny tickets before handing them to the ticket officer. The machine beeped with each scan, and Haruko buzzed ahead, bouncing on her heels. She called out for everyone to come on, tugging at your sleeve before darting forward again. As you stepped through the gates, your jaw dropped a little. The theme park was a kaleidoscope of colors and chaos. Brightly painted roller coasters twisted and turned against the backdrop of a crystal-clear blue sky, their tracks disappearing into clouds before plummeting down at dizzying speeds. Carnival music hummed from every corner, blending with the chatter of families and the occasional scream from thrill-seekers. Vendors lined the pathways, their stands overflowing with balloons, oversized plushies, and a variety of fried foods on sticks. The smell of buttery popcorn and sugary funnel cakes hung heavy in the air, making your stomach growl despite the breakfast you'd had. Haruko pointed to a towering roller coaster with loops that seemed to defy physics, bouncing on her toes with sparkling eyes. You smiled at her energy but couldn't help glancing back at Shoto again. He was quietly taking it all in, his mismatched eyes scanning the vibrant chaos around him. Despite his calm demeanor, there was something in the way his lips almost not quite curved upward that made you feel lighter. You teased Haruko, noting that she was already picking out which ride to try first. She grinned back, declaring that they had to do the teacups first because it was tradition. You groaned in mock horror, calling them overpriced nausea machines, to which Haruko laughed, already skipping toward the ride. Behind you, Haruko's mom followed at a calmer pace, scanning the park map with the focus of someone planning a battle strategy. She announced that they were starting over at a cluster of brightly colored rides. You shot one last glance at Shoto, reminding yourself that today was about fun for everyone, and took a deep breath, following Haruko into the fray. Stumbling off the teacups, you clutched your stomach as the world around you spun in lazy, nauseating circles. You groaned, planting your feet and closing your eyes for a moment. Stretching your arms above your head, you took a shaky breath, hoping it would help steady the spinning. The sun had already started setting, casting long shadows over the pavement outside the theme park gates. The once lively and crowded entrance was now mostly empty, except for a few families waiting to be picked up. You stood there with Haruko, her mom, and Shoto, the energy from the day still buzzing in the air. Shoto was gripping your hand, his hold warm but a little too firm, while Haruko clung to her mom's leg like a stubborn child who refused to go home. The two of them had been bickering on and off the whole time, mostly because Haruko had noticed Shoto holding on to you and took it as some kind of personal offense. Not that you were paying much attention to them. Your mind was elsewhere, thinking about All Might. You reflected on everything you had seen that day, the way he had saved you without hesitation, the strength he carried in his presence alone, and how his smile made everything feel like it would be okay, no matter how scary the situation was. That was the kind of hero you wanted to be. Your grip unconsciously tightened around Shoto's hand. Feeling the newfound pressure, he turned to you and suddenly gave you a light pat on the back. You lurched forward, surprised by the unexpected gesture. You wheezed, turning to glare at him, questioning why he had done that. Shoto blinked at you, his face completely neutral, explaining that he was simply patting your back. You stared at him in disbelief, still hunched over. He tilted his head slightly, his brows pinching together as if you were the odd one for questioning it. He mentioned that his sister does it when he feels down. You opened your mouth to respond but then closed it again, carefully considering your words. You suggested that he seriously underestimated his own strength. Before he could respond, Haruko suddenly wedged herself between the two of you, placing a much softer hand on your back while giving Shoto a smug smile. She pointed out that this was how to pat someone's back without causing any discomfort. Shoto just stared at her blankly while you sighed, deciding you would need an ice pack as soon as you got home. Before you could fully recover, the sharp screech of tires tearing across the road made you flinch. The sound was so loud it rattled your skull. Haruko immediately slapped her hands over her ears, expressing her surprise as a car skidded to a stop right in front of you. The driver's door swung open with such force that it seemed it might come off its hinges. Before you could even register who it was, a blur of movement launched itself toward you. You were suddenly enveloped in an overwhelming embrace as the person wrapped you in a tight hug, their hands stroking your hair gently, as if you were a lost puppy. You gasped, struggling to breathe, your arms pinned awkwardly at your sides. You felt as if you were suffocating. Through the smothering embrace, you managed to tilt your head up, and your mind finally caught up with the situation. It was Auntie Nemuri. Midnight was currently squeezing the life out of you. You barely had a moment to breathe before she launched into full theatrics. Her grip tightened around you as she dramatically stroked your hair. She exclaimed about the nerve of some people, expressing her outrage that they had dared to touch you. Your face flushed as you realized two very specific people were still behind you, watching the scene unfold. You twisted in her hold, glancing between Haruko, who looked ready to burst into laughter, and Shoto, who simply blinked slowly. You needed an escape. Finally, Nemuri set you down, smoothing your hair as if her previous actions were completely normal. She asked if you had been scared, her eyes sparkling with concern. You squared your shoulders, desperate to regain your dignity. You insisted you weren't scared, shaking your head a little too vigorously. You attempted to explain how cool it was when All Might showed up, fumbling over your words as you tried to convey your excitement without revealing how overwhelmed you felt. You expressed your desire to be a great hero like him. Nemuri's eyes lit up with excitement as she interrupted, declaring that you wanted to be like her. You froze, realizing your mistake. Before you could clarify, she scooped you up again and tossed you into the passenger seat of her car, slamming the door shut behind you. With a gleeful tone, she sang about saying goodbye to your friends, hopping into the driver's seat with a mischievous grin. You felt disoriented as you pushed yourself against the window, watching Haruko and Shoto exchange glances, both processing the situation. You offered a weak wave, trying to salvage your dignity. Suddenly, the car lurched forward. You were thrown back into your seat as Nemuri accelerated, ignoring nearly every traffic law and likely breaking the sound barrier. The city blurred past in a whirlwind of lights as she laughed joyfully, already on her way to Aizawa's place. You gripped your seatbelt tightly, staring out the window, unable to move as Nemuri's laughter echoed in the background. At this rate, you weren't sure if you would even make it home. Nemuri's heels clacked loudly against the apartment building's stairs as she practically dragged you up by the collar of your shirt. You barely had time to catch your breath before she came to a sudden halt in front of Aizawa's door. Without hesitation, she banged both fists against the wood, calling out for Aizawa, insisting she knew he was inside. Moments later, the door swung open to reveal Aizawa, already dressed and looking slightly frazzled. He glanced at Nemuri with his usual deadpan expression, then down at you, letting out a sigh of relief. Nemuri didn't let him finish as she pushed past him, dragging you inside like a prize she had just won. She twirled you around, grinning widely, and urged you to share what you had said about her. Aizawa exhaled heavily, clearly regretting engaging in this conversation. He guessed that you had called her annoying and trying to steal his daughter. Nemuri yanked your arm, making you stumble forward, insisting you tell him what you said. You blinked, still trying to process everything happening around you. You hesitated, trying to find the right words. Nemuri paused for effect, leaning on the bookshelf dramatically, one hand over her heart, and declared that you had said she was a great hero and that you wanted to be just like her. Silence filled the room. Aizawa stared at her, then slowly turned to you, his eyebrows raised in disbelief, a hint of offense and hurt in his expression. Your face heated up instantly as you tried to clarify that wasn't exactly what you meant. You covered your face with both hands in embarrassment. Nemuri placed her hands on your shoulders, beaming with pride, insisting that you had said it wholeheartedly and that her legacy would live on through you. Aizawa shot her a look that could silence a room full of villains, rubbing his temples in frustration. He turned back to you, asking if you had actually said that. You opened your mouth to protest, but Nemuri squeezed your shoulders tighter, reminding you to choose your words wisely. You finally admitted, perhaps a little reluctantly, that you might have said something along those lines. Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose, his usual expression somehow even more exhausted than before. He asked if you were serious about wanting to be a hero. You froze, your hands still covering your face. This wasn't how you imagined this conversation would go. Slowly, you peeked through your fingers, glancing between Aizawa's stern gaze and Nemuri's overly enthusiastic grin. You mumbled that you had been thinking about it for a while but had never voiced it. Nemuri squealed with delight, clapping her hands together as if she had just won the lottery. She proclaimed that you were destined for greatness and that her legacy lived on. Aizawa shot her a glare, warning her to stop insinuating that you were her child, or he would ban her from the apartment. You shuffled your feet awkwardly, feeling caught in the middle of a strange standoff. You asked if this meant you could train or something. Aizawa turned his attention back to you, his expression softening slightly. He reiterated that being a hero wasn't just about flashy costumes and saving the day. It was hard work, dangerous, and not something you could easily back out of once you started. You nodded, your determination outweighing your nerves. You expressed your desire to help people, just like him and Nemuri. Nemuri chimed in, insisting that if Aizawa didn't say yes, she would adopt you herself. Aizawa ignored her, his eyes still locked on you. The room fell silent, the weight of his gaze making you fidget. Finally, he let out a long sigh, running a hand through his messy hair, and reluctantly agreed. But if they were serious about this, they would have to do it their way. There would be no shortcuts and no slacking off. If there was any indication that they weren't ready, it would be over. Understood?